During my freshman year, I was certified as the absolute brokest player in the entire class. There was this elite female character in my batch named Gu Wanwan, the kind of hyper-rich whale whose family literally owned a massive mining enterprise. During a completely mundane round of Truth or Dare, she lost the match and the resulting penalty stake was locked at a staggering $90,000. Every single spectator assumed her account would instantly breach contract and back out. But she executed an immediate bank transfer on the spot, attaching a 4-word transaction log, accepting the loss gracefully. From that exact timestamp forward, my entire life trajectory underwent a massive system rewrite. The luxury seafood rice bowls at the cafeteria that my budget previously locked out. I began spamming orders for them daily, alongside premium milk teas from the shop right below my dorm. I completely transitioned from a part-time grinding wage slave into a high-tier regular VIP. As for those ultra-expensive postgraduate exam preparation materials next to the library, my purchasing power finally scaled high enough to secure the entire complete set. She never once monitored my credit balance or questioned my expenditure metrics, and my account never transmitted a single line of explanation to her system. 4 cycles later, on the exact date of graduation, my primary bank account was depleted down to 82 cents. Her massive financial payload had sustained my playthrough perfectly right until the microsecond I clutched my graduation degree and corporate job offer. Another 4 cycles advanced on the server timeline, and I located a severely curled up, shivering character model huddled right underneath a pedestrian overpass. A heavily smudged, dust-covered facial texture, paired with completely ruined low-tier clothing assets. Yet those specific premium optical nodes were instantly recognized by my database Gu Wanwan. Intel logs indicated that her family's corporate guild had suffered an absolute bankruptcy wipe. Her parental units had deleted their accounts and fled the map, leaving her lone character model to tank 100% of the devastating debt aggro. I executed a crouch macro and extended my physical input hand toward her. Are you ready to link parties and follow my pathfinding? The exact microsecond my terminal audio began to trigger, my character model was stationed on the 3rd floor of the cafeteria, aggressively scraping a rice bowl asset. A single portion of plain white rice paired with a complimentary zero-cost soup item. The smartphone display suddenly booted up its backlight, rendering the caller ID Joe Hao. I clicked the accept call macro, noticing my finger tracking attributes had accidentally caught a stray grain of rice. A voice boomed across the channel, "Where is your hitbox stationed right now? Cafeteria, hurry the hell up. The Regal Splendor, KTV VIP room 302. It's Wanwan's birthday instance." My brow furrowed as my internal processors ran the data. Gu Wanwan, the undisputed top-tier financial titan of our class faction. What functional link did her birthday celebration have with my low-tier profile? I think I'll skip this specific event raid. Cease your useless dialogue. Wanwan, manually designated your user ID. Get your asset over here immediately. The communication channel abruptly disconnected. I stared down at the remaining half portion of rice assets sitting inside my bowl, completely losing my appetite, knowing that attending meant splitting the massive party bill. Tonight's shared expenditure would drain at least $200 to $300 from my inventory, an amount that constituted half a month's worth of my entire survival upkeep funds. Choosing to skip this instance wasn't an option since Gu Wanwan had explicitly targeted my user ID. My profile maintained absolutely 0 network connections inside the class, excluding Joe Hao, a naturally social roommate unit who forced a bridge into my server space. Outgrowing someone of his standing brought absolute 0 tactical advantages to my playthrough. I deposited my cheap utensil assets back onto the counter, triggering a move command out of the cafeteria zone. The seasonal autumn wind debuff was remarkably chilling. I forcefully tightened the fabric of my severely washed out, faded ancient jacket asset to preserve my temperature metrics. The Regal Splendor KTV venue was situated just a short pathfinding distance from our campus base. I logged exactly 20 minutes of manual walking time to reach the destination. The elite greeting unit at the main threshold scanned my character model, their optical sensors shifting with a distinct expression of judgment. Completely ignoring the slight, I pathed straight toward the 3rd floor to locate room 302. The entrance node wasn't fully sealed, allowing high decibel audio tracks to blast across the entire local channel. I deployed a push command on the door asset, revealing a massive VIP zone occupied by over 20 active player models. The table assets were heavily loaded with luxury fruit platters, snacks, and premium foreign alcohol items. Gu Wanwan was stationed at the absolute focal coordinate point, equipped with a dazzling, high-tier dress cosmetic that made her look exactly like a sovereign royal unit. Joe Hao detected my coordinates entering the room and initiated a hand wave emote, signaling me to navigate directly to his location. I dropped into a seating position on a remote couch asset in the dark corner. 0 users in the lobby directed any attention toward my profile. They were all clustered around Gu Wanwan, unleashing constant laughter, emotes, spamming karaoke tracks, and rolling dice assets. I computed a profound systemic realization that my character model was entirely incompatible with this zone. The entire atmosphere was saturated with high net worth data streams. After a brief server tick, a user suggested that standard vocal tracks were getting stale, proposing they switch to a high stakes truth or dare match. The entire party group cheered in agreement. A premium wine bottle asset began spinning rapidly on the center table. My internal processor was praying that the vector wouldn't lock onto my coordinates. The rotational trajectory barely scraped past my position several times. Eventually, the bottleneck vector halted, locking dead center onto Gu Wanwan. The entire lobby erupted into chaotic cheers, shouting, "Wanwan, are you extracting a truth log or initiating a dare macro?" Gu Wanwan had consumed a moderate amount of alcohol items, causing a minor flushing effect on her cheek textures. She laughed, selecting the dare macro. The male unit leading the round was named Lee Jae, a player who constantly chased maximum attention metrics on the campus server. His optical nodes executed a sharp rotational scan, locking down precisely on my coordinate point. "Oh look. 1-1. Does your system possess the guts to interact with the unit positioned at your rear right vector?" The player known as Chen Chi. "Let's lock in a high stakes bet." The entire room's visual attention instantly snapped and locked dead center onto my avatar. My character model completely froze up as Gu Wanwan executed a slow head turn to scan my profile, her expression radiating that signature ultra-elite Heiress aura of pure detached curiosity toward absolutely everything in the game world. "What's the wager?" Li Ji smirked. Raising his volume parameters significantly, "Let's bet whether your account possesses the absolute guts to instantly execute a $90,000 transaction directly to his balance." The VIP lounge instance plunged into a microsecond of dead silence, before exploding into an even more chaotic wave of uproarious mockery. 90,000. Lija has your main processor completely corrupted. This is a basic party minigame. To escalate the stakes to such an extreme tier, it's just casual fun. There's absolutely no way she initiates that transfer. Lija shrugged his shoulders mockingly. "What are you backing out already? If your system yields, your penalty is downing 3 consecutive penalty drinks." His core strategy was to force a public embarrassment debuff onto Gu Wanwan's profile, while simultaneously dragging my own low-tier account through the absolute dirt. Every active user in the lobby held their breath, waiting for Gu Wanwan's command. I could feel my facial textures completely burning with intense humiliation. $90,000, a completely trivial, effortless numeric value, tossed around carelessly by their lips. Just a few server cycles ago, my mother had transmitted a voice log stating our family's home construction project was hit with a severe $20,000 deficit, leaving my parental units so stressed their systems couldn't enter sleep mode. I remained pinned to the couch asset, feeling like a literal clown in an elite lobby. Gu Wanwan did not output a single line of dialogue. She merely locked her optical sensors squarely onto my position, her gaze remaining remarkably level and unbothered, devoid of any toxic mockery or patronizing pity metrics. It was as if she was running a cold algorithmic evaluation on the exact value of this dare asset. Zhou gave my hitbox a subtle nudge from the side, whispering, "Don't process this data, bro." Laji is running a totally brain-dead script, but it was mathematically impossible for my system to ignore it when your entire human dignity parameters are being forcefully crushed into the dirt by raw financial power. Maintaining a detached status log is not an option. Suddenly, Gu Wanwan's lips curved into a sharp smile. Sure, why not? She retrieved her premium smartphone asset from the table, booting up her high-tier banking application. The surrounding player base instantly stiffened in utter shock, assuming her terminal was merely executing a massive bluff macro. She elevated her gaze to scan my face once more. "What is your account's link number?" The entire VIP lounge instance succumbed to a deathly absolute silence, with only the background audio track continuing to loop across the room. Every single spectator's gaze was darting frantically back and forth from Gu Wanwan straight over to my frozen character model. Lija's arrogant smirk completely glitched and froze dead on his facial mesh, while Zhou Hao's processor entirely locked up in absolute disbelief. His jaw hung wide open, his voice processor completely failing to render a single line of speech. I felt a massive rush of adrenaline hit my skull as my blood pressure spiked to the absolute limit. My link number? She was genuinely asking for my primary database digits. My throat felt completely parched dry as a desert biome, leaving my vocal cords incapable of outputting even a minor syllable. Yet, Gu Wanwan remained remarkably patient, showing zero signs of a system timeout. Hoisting her premium device once more, she reissued the prompt for my contact digits. Like a completely broken hard-coded automation, I mechanically recited the entire string of numbers. She dropped her gaze, her fingers flashing across the screen overlay with lethal high-speed APM. The spectator units scattered throughout the lounge began exchanging bewildered, glitched glances. A few low-volume audio logs whispered through the chat, "Is she actually running a transaction? There's absolutely no way, right? We are talking about a massive $90,000 payload here. No player would burn that much capital just to protect a pride stat." All optical sensors remained locked on her. The facial textures she displayed were intensely focused, as if her account were merely executing a totally standard routine baseline task. After a countdown of just a few server frames, she lowered her mobile device, breaking her focus from the interface. She elevated her gaze to lock eyes squarely with a visibly sweating Lija. It's finalized. Lija's facial expression underwent a catastrophic glitch, turning completely hideous. Wanwan, but Gu Wanwan abruptly cut off his audio input before he could spam a defense script. Her vocal parameters were chillingly flat, devoid of any emotional modulation. I accept the loss gracefully. The moment the line terminated, she hoisted a wine asset down a single swig, and completely severed all visual tracking from my coordinate position. It was as if this high-stakes event had already been purged from her active cache memory. Suddenly, deep inside my equipment slot, my mobile device triggered a sharp, high-intensity haptic vibration log. My physical hand was visibly trembling as I plunged it deep into my pocket mesh. The illuminated screen was rendering an unread high-priority automated banking notification. Your savings account terminal ending in digits XXX has successfully processed an inbound credit of $90,000. Current available balance, $90,088.82. That endless row of digital zeros pierced through my optical receptors with blinding force. $88.82. That was the absolute entirety of my remaining survival credits for this month's cycle. And now with the 90,000 injection, it scaled to $90,088.82. I aggressively forced the smartphone device back into my pocket slot. My palm surface entirely coated in slick nervous sweat data. I initiated a sudden stand command, rising to my feet. The entire room of active player avatars immediately pivoted to track my model. Their optical logs were transmitting a highly complex blend of conflicting data streams. There was raw, unfiltered shock burning NV metrics, and the toxic anticipation of spectators waiting for a drama bomb drop. I opted to deploy absolute silence, refusing to broadcast a single line of chat. Spinning my character model around, I pathed straight toward the main exit threshold of the room. Zhouhao's audio track blared from behind me. Chen-Chi, where the hell are you pathfinding to? I refused to execute a head turn macro or slow my velocity. I breached the outer perimeter of the Regal Splendor venue, exiting the instance entirely. The external Sub-Zero night wind crashed violently against my facial skin mesh. My character model experienced a heavy shiver debuff, shuddering uncontrollably under the cold sky. My mind remained a completely blank canvas, entirely devoid of thoughts. I logged massive pathfinding distances along the desolate streets, possessing absolutely zero coordinates for a final destination, citing a 24-hour convenience store entity along the sidewalk. I triggered an entry command, stepping past the threshold. My avatar stood completely paralyzed before the inventory shelves for a long duration, before I finally selected a premium tier brand of instant cup noodles, a high-quality ham sausage item, and a marinated egg cosmetic, completing a checkout transaction total of $15. In past server cycles, my financial block forced me to only purchase basic $3 bag noodles. Clutching my newly acquired consumables, I paddled back to my residential dorm unit. The map instance was entirely vacant, as Zhouhao and the other party members had not yet executed their return macros. I booted up the electric kettle to boil water and prepped the noodles, watching the steam vapors ascend, which finally allowed my sensory nodes to feel like my vitality bar was replenishing. Stationing my character model at the desk, I pulled up my device to run a secondary scan on that exact transaction alert, 90,000. My optical sensors verified each digit of that endless string of zeros over and over. This capital payload meant my mother would no longer suffer system sleep disruptions due to financial anxiety. It meant my account could finally stop farming free soup items from the cafeteria. And it granted me the spending power to unlock that complete set of postgraduate exam prep materials that my database had lusted after for so long next to the library. It gave me the baseline resources to survive like a real human being on this server. I completely cleared the noodle item, draining the savory broth down to the absolute last drop. Following this, I deployed a physical notebook and a pen asset from my desk. My structural hand mechanics were still exhibiting minor tremors, but my optical focus was brilliantly sharp and lucid. On the absolute primary page of the notebook asset, I hard-coded 4 massive words, 4-year master plan. Then I launched a comprehensive data computation. The remaining college campaign spanned exactly 4 years, equating to 48 monthly cycles. Allocating a strict monthly survival stipend for my character model, I calculated that 48 cycles would drain precisely $38,400 from the vault. Academic tuition fees required $5,000 per annum, meaning the remaining 3 cycles would lock down a total of $15,000. Postgraduate prep resources and advanced professional textbooks would consume an estimated $5,000. My parental unit's home construction questline required a $20,000 injection. Running the final math, the absolute operational expenditure totaled exactly $78,400. The remaining $11,600 balance would serve as an emergency reserve fund permanently locked from standard use. I meticulously logged every single calculated transaction with absolute clarity onto the paper. This $90,000 sum was a literal god-tier windfall dropped directly from the heavens. It was the absolute penalty stake that Gu Wanwan had lost during that gamble. But it was also the literal lifeline for my next 4 years of progression. I had to optimize its utility flawlessly, utilizing its power to sustain my playthrough until graduation, securing my official degree certificate, landing an elite high-paying corporate career track, and ultimately transferring this entire payload back to her account principal plus interest. The moment my pen completed the final punctuation mark of the text, the sky outside was already approaching its dawn cycle. I stared intently at the hard-coded roadmap logged within my notebook. My internal servers achieved an unprecedented state of absolute tranquility. The following cycle, when I pathed to the lecture hall, my optical sensors locked onto Gu Wanwan, standing right at the instructional building's main threshold. She was clustered with a squad of female players exchanging high-frequency laughter emotes, equipped with a completely different premium dress cosmetic than the high-tier gear I had witnessed her wearing during the yesterday instance. The microsecond she logged my coordinates, she froze for a brief server frame, but immediately after acting as if zero data anomalies had ever disrupted the server. She rotated her character model away and resumed chatting with her party members. I likewise lowered my line of sight and executed a high-velocity pathing command into the classroom. Between our respective accounts stood a massive $90,000 partition wall, and yet that exact $90,000 code was the only remaining link binding our profiles. My gameplay loop had fundamentally shifted. The primary metric to undergo an immediate upgrade was my nutritional consumption routine. I entirely ceased pathing to the third floor to farm zero-cost complimentary soup items. Instead, I deployed straight to the luxury seafood vendor station on the second tier, inputting a purchase command for a $25 premium shrimp rice bowl asset. The exact moment I initialized that order for the very first time, the server unit behind the counter completely glitched out for a second, directing an intense double-take optical scan over my character model. Maintaining a totally flat, unrendered facial expression, I finalized the payment macro, carrying my loaded inventory tray over to a secluded corner coordinate. The shrimp assets were remarkably fresh, possessing an elite texture profile, and I consumed the meal at an incredibly low velocity, masticating every single bite with absolute concentration. Johao, carrying his own hyper-expensive deluxe combo platter, spawned directly into the seating slot opposite my position. Yoichi, did your account suddenly hit a massive gold injection raid? He stared down at my premium shrimp consumption assets, his facial mesh registering pure astonishment. Did you hit a god-tier lottery jackpot or something? I kept my skull buried low, continuing to process my food assets. Then how do you explain this sudden stat boost? Your character behavior parameters are completely malfunctioning, bro. Regarding that absolute madness from last night, just focus on consuming your food assets. Sensing that my terminal was aggressively throwing up firewall blocks against the topic, Johao executed a slight mouth twitch emote and ceased his interrogation routine. However, he would still occasionally run a highly perplexed optical scan over my profile. As for that high-traffic milk tea vendor station stationed right underneath our residential dorm tower, my pathfinding lines used to exclusively bypass its perimeter entirely. Now, during every single afternoon cycle, I would path inside to acquire a beverage unit, opting for the absolute lowest tier $8 fresh lemonade item. The junior underclassman working the counter asset quickly logged my identity into her database. Senior, are you running the standard lemonade macro again today? Affirmative. Clutching that liquid consumable, I executed a slow, low-velocity walk macro back to the dorm barracks. I could make that single item sustain my hydration metrics for an entire hour. The flavor profile was sharp tart and layered with a subtle hint of sweetness. Deep inside the library archives, that premium cutting-edge postgraduate professional specialization exam preparation package consisted of an expansive 12-volume inventory manifest, carrying a heavy price tag locked at exactly $880. My account had migrated to those exact coordinates to run visual inspections on it a massive number of times. But during every previous visit, I could only skim through the preview pages. This time, I marched straight up to the store owner and delivered a clear command. That entire specialized preparation package. I'm purchasing every single volume. While the merchant packed the inventory, I finalized the payment transaction, stepping out of the shop, cradling a massive heavy stack of pristine new manuals. The daylight cascading down onto my character model carried a genuinely comforting warmth. My daily routine no longer required grinding in the library just to secure a basic study slot, nor did I have to copy obsolete low-tier notes from other users. I had officially unlocked my own personal high-tier arsenal. When the weekend cycle arrived, my mother initiated another voice link. Her audio output was still heavily saturated with deep exhaustion. Regarding the construction deficit, your father attempted to source a loan from the network, but they flat out rejected his profile. Mom, cease searching for loans. If we don't borrow, how do we proceed? The project site foreman is aggressively demanding payment. I have the necessary funds right here. The opposite end of the channel fell into a massive prolonged silence. When my mother's voice finally transmitted, it carried a distinct shaky sob. You have it. Where on earth could your account secure that much capital? Have you engaged in some dangerous illegal exploit out there? Negative. The university administration just granted me a massive academic scholarship. And when combined with the baseline savings I've accumulated, it totals exactly $20,000. A scholarship of that scale, it's a top-tier national award. I deployed the deception script with absolute precision, my heart rate remaining completely flat. Then, how will your own profile survive without that upkeep capital? My balance is more than sufficient. Broadcast your bank routing digits to my terminal, and I'll deploy to the financial node this afternoon. I terminated the voice link, routing straight to the bank branch to wire the $20,000 payload over. The exact microsecond I exited the financial facility, the sky texture above seemed noticeably more vibrant and clear. The absolute primary line item in my planner notebook was officially cleared. I permanently ceased grinding part-time home tutoring gigs and deleted the kitchen assistance routine at the cafeteria from my daily loop. 100% of my time allocations were redirected into pure academic stat grinding. I spammed hours at the library archives, locked down long-duration self-study sessions, and aggressively digested specialized textbooks that were as massive and dense as bricks. Despite the shift, Guwanwan and I still shared the exact same classroom instance. During massive lecture hall raids, her character model would anchor the front row, while my profile was stationed all the way in the back row. During small seminar instances, the matchmaking algorithm would occasionally drop us into the exact same party. She never directed a single line of dialogue toward my system, and I never once attempted to initialize a conversation loop with her. During one specific team assignment event, the quest objective required a 2-player squad to execute a major presentation. The instructor ran a randomized assignment script pairing my character model directly with hers. The surrounding classmates locked their optical sensors onto our positions, their expressions becoming incredibly subtle and tense. Ever since that chaotic night instance concluded, the entire class server discovered that Guwanwan had dropped a massive $90,000 payload to fund the absolute brokest lowest tier male player in the batch. Countless corrupted variants of rumors began flooding the local chat logs. Some users claimed our characters were locked in a hidden romance quest, while others speculated my account was being fully bankrolled as his personal pet. Guwanwan acted as if her notification filters blocked out all the noise. She locked her optical nodes onto my position, deploying a purely mechanical business-like tone. Which specific data sectors are you optimizing? I'll tank the final 3 slides. The moment the line terminated, she rotated away to run strategizing macros with other players. Throughout the entire lifecycle of the project, we logged 0 personal communication. The core intelligence database was mined entirely by me, and I built the entire presentation asset from scratch. When the countdown reached the final 24 hours before the live event, I transmitted the finalized project files directly to her terminal. Her system auto-responded with a minimal 2-word ping received. The next day we deployed onto the stage, as I ran the voice lines for my designated sector, while she executed the presentation for her own data branch. Our tactical coordination didn't register perfect synergy metrics, but we suffered absolutely 0 operational glitches. The instructor unit awarded our team a highly favorable score. Descending from the stage, her high-tier character model pathed out in front, while my avatar followed directly in her slipstream. Just as we approached the exit threshold node, she abruptly executed a full-stop command, turning her head back to lock eyes with me, remarkably well executed. This constituted the absolute first string of dialogue she had directed at my profile since that fateful night. It wasn't framed as an interrogative prompt, nor was it coded as a polite request, but rather a completely flat, detached analytical rating, just fulfilling my role. She executed a minor nod animation, pivoting her character model to exit the zone. Her retreating silhouette radiated the exact same hyper-proud aura from the KTV instance, completely cold and detached, as if that $90,000 transaction was truly nothing more than a trivial minigame. Her system possessed the luxury to not care, but my profile was forced to keep track, back in my dorm barracks. I booted up my 4-year master plan notebook, and directly beside Guwanwan's hard-coded ID on the title page, I logged a new entry, Cooperative Questline 1 completed, before aggressively striking a heavy line right through the log. It was a vital psychological ritual to remind my main processor that between her profile and mine, except for cold capital, absolutely 0 data connection existed. By the dawn of the second academic cycle, I successfully unlocked a top-tier national scholarship reward worth $8,000. I refused to let my primary wallet touch a single cent of this new capital, transferring the payload completely raw into a secondary isolated bank vault. This constituted a massive revenue surge completely outside my original roadmap. This marked the absolute initial seed capital for my comprehensive debt repayment strategy. I continuously maintained an ironclad execution of my 4-year master plan, limiting my system survival stipend to a razor-thin $800 per month. Not a single coin over, not a single coin under. I deployed a compact physical ledger asset to log every single financial transaction, maintaining absolute precision down to the decimal point. Purchased a single pen item. For 1.50 logged, consumed a basic meal combo. For 12.00 logged, contributed to the collective class fund. For 20.00 logged, Johao openly critiqued my daily routine, claiming, "My character model was operating exactly like a hard-coded robot. Chai, is this extreme optimization routine honestly necessary? Your account isn't even suffering from a severe resource deficit right now. What massive achievement are you actually grinding for?" I lacked any viable data path to explain it to him. His system couldn't comprehend that the 90,000 payload wasn't free capital to me. It was a literal high-tension leash tightly secured around my throat. And the opposite node of that leash was firmly gripped in Guanwan's hand. My only strategic option was to rely entirely on my own grinding, forcefully snapping that line millimeter by millimeter, before my system could finally reboot and unlock the freedom to breathe again. During the latter half of the second academic cycle, the university campus initiated a major sports festival event. Every individual class faction faced a mandatory enrollment quota for competitors when the counselor unit failed to recruit any player for the grueling 3-kilometer raid. Johao manually entered my user ID directly into the roster slot. "Come on, Chi. Your daily gameplay loop consists entirely of jogging macros and library grinds, so your stamina metrics must be off the charts. Go secure some glory points for our class faction." I offered zero resistance to the command. Running macros required absolutely zero financial expenditure, and it simultaneously optimized my physical constitution stats. On the designated match day, the environmental heat metrics spiked severely. Equipped with only my most basic unbranded athletic shorts and tank top cosmetics, I took my position directly at the starting coordinate grid. The starter pistol fired, echoing through the map. I surged forward, locking strictly into my own pre-calculated pacing rhythm. I wasn't chasing a top-tier podium rank. My sole quest objective was to successfully clear the entire distance. By the time I breached the final lap threshold, my stamina bar was completely depleted, leaving me utterly exhausted. Heavy sweat streams blurred my optical sensor feed, and my respiratory lungs felt like they were engulfed in a raging fire debuff as I pathed directly past the main spectator grandstand. I executed a subconscious head tilt macro, casting a glance toward Gu Wanwan, who was stationed right there. She was clustered with the high-ranking student council officer units, outfitted in their premium unified uniform cosmetics. Her head adorned with an elite sun hat asset. She appeared to be broadcasting some dialogue to the users seated beside her, her facial textures projecting a soft, effortless smile emote. Under the intense solar glare, her high-tier skin asset radiated a flawless, luminescent glow. She didn't cast a single glance toward the racetrack coordinates, nor did she log my position within her sandbox world. This entire campus sports festival event, which she clearly categorized as an uninspired low-tier minigame, was likely scaled far below. A casual line of chat shared with her elite party members. I forcefully cut my visual tracking, gritting my teeth to push my movement speed parameters forward. The exact microsecond I breached the final finish line, collision mesh, my character model suffered a total systemic collapse from exhaustion. I dropped straight down, collapsing directly onto the track asset. Johao sprinted into my rendering distance to support my avatar, deploying a basic hydration item to my inventory 4th place. "Chi, you absolute beast. You were a mere hair's breadth away from securing a podium reward." My respiratory system was aggressively cycling deep gulps of air, rendering me physically incapable of outputting a single line of speech. I was simply struck by the realization that the structural chasm dividing me and Gu Wanwan was mapped out precisely like this grueling 3-kilometer racetrack. I was down in the trenches, burning 100% of my stamina stats just to move, drenched in heavy sweat data, and looking completely pathetic and unoptimized. Meanwhile, her avatar remained permanently anchored on that untouchable sky-high VIP grandstand, completely unbothered and detached from the simulation below. During the evening cycle, I pathed back to my residential dorm unit, and inside the pages of my 4-year master plan ledger, I logged a new structural heading, debt liquidating vector. Seed capital locked $8,000. Target payout threshold, exactly $90,000. This objective was no longer a glitched, unachievable fantasy. My system had officially laid down its very first foundational brick. The server time elapsed at an incredibly high velocity. My daily gameplay loop operated like an immutable, hard-coded script attending lectures, consuming basic nutrition items, grinding at the library archives, and initiating sleep macros. I rarely registered for group server events, and almost never initialized a conversation loop with other users. The vast majority of the classmates in our faction had completely adapted to my isolated solo player style. To their databases, they only logged one core profile. Chen Qi was an eccentric anomaly who possessed frighteningly overpowered academic stats. Only my own internal processor understood the reality I lacked the permission to pause. I feared that a single frame of stagnation would cause that massive financial weight to crush my profile into the dirt. Upon entering the 3rd academic cycle, I successfully secured a slot assisting a high-tier professor unit with advanced data projects, which credited my wallet with a modest $500 monthly stipend. Simultaneously, I leveraged my off-peak server hours to farm freelance programming side quests across the external network. The physical grind was brutal, frequently forcing my terminal to run code until midnight cycles. Yet, with the conclusion of every single monthly cycle, my designated debt clearing account would experience a steady injection of $1,000 to $2,000. Watching that specific numeric display incrementally climb upward was the sole mechanic that allowed my internal processor to register a faint sense of stability. Gu Wanwan's high-tier gameplay loop appeared completely immune to structural change. She remained permanently locked as the absolute focal point of every social lobby, continuously equipped with hyper-elegant fashion cosmetics, and deploying to the lecture hall driving luxury vehicular assets whose exact brands exceeded my database limits. We maintained an absolute lack of standard text or voice communication, merely crossing pathfinding trajectories on the campus map on rare occasions. Her line of sight would briefly sweep across my character model, locking onto my coordinates for less than a single structural second. The data encoded in that specific look was precisely how one might scan a completely familiar yet entirely detached NPC. I integrated this reality into my system with complete composure. We were fundamentally spawned into completely separate world servers. That $90,000 transaction was a chaotic system anomaly, but it was simultaneously an ironclad contractual trade. She sacrificed raw capital to purchase a victory condition in a high-stakes truth or dare minigame. I bartered my raw personal dignity, alongside the entire progression arc of my next 4-year campaign, exchanging them to unlock a solitary high-variance chance to rewrite my destiny macro. At this exact frame, the transaction remains fully active. And as for my profile, I am grinding aggressively to evolve into a fully qualified contractual counterparty. In the blink of a server frame, the campaign transitioned into the 4th academic year. The mandatory lecture load dropped drastically, and every player across the server began frantically grinding for their endgame builds. Some spammed postgraduate entrance trials, others queued for civil service exams, while the rest hunted for corporate career tracks within the corridors of the residential dorm barracks. The local audio channels were saturated daily with high-frequency outbound communications and live interview dialogue streams, frequently interspersed with the faint, heavily suppressed audio of sobbing players. My own task log was similarly overloaded with critical objectives. On one front, I had to successfully execute my final graduation thesis project, while simultaneously prepping for written technical trials and multi-stage corporate interviews. With several top-tier tech conglomerates, my 4-year master plan was rapidly approaching its ultimate server countdown. Within the logged entries of my ledger, every single resource expenditure was documented with absolute forensic transparency. That $90,000 payload had its utility metrics squeezed down to the absolute last drop of value. I utilized that capital to fully weaponize my intellectual processing power, while simultaneously leveraging it to sustain a baseline level of human dignity. Gu Wanwan, on the other hand, was apparently preparing to migrate to an overseas server. I scraped this intel directly from Zhou Hao's dialogue logs. Her high-tier parental units fully optimized her roadmap eons ago, an elite Ivy League degree asset followed by immediate placement into a Wall Street whale faction. A literal god-tier spawn who won the game at character creation, I executed a simple nod macro, my emotional processor registering absolute neutrality. This was fundamentally the default endgame progression track coded into her destiny. During one entirely ordinary afternoon instance, I logged out of the library archives and initiated a pathfinding macro back to the dorms, while bypassing the perimeter coordinates of the campus artificial lake. My visual sensors suddenly locked onto a highly familiar character model. It was Gu Wanwan. She was stationed completely solo, seated upon a concrete bench by the water's edge. 0 high-tier sycophants were present in her immediate vicinity. 0 guild members accompanied her. She was equipped with a minimalist pure white sundress cosmetic, staring blankly into the lake's rendering engine. The residual rays of the descending sun cascaded directly over her avatar, coating her silhouette in a highly cinematic soft golden particle effect. She completely lacked her standard operational demeanor, displaying none of that intense, hyper-proud barrier aura designed to keep lower-tier players miles away. Her current status bar projected a profound sense of isolation, bordering on a remarkably fragile vulnerability. I executed an immediate full-stop command, anchoring my character model beneath the shadow layer of a nearby tree asset. My processor harbored 0 data regarding why she was running a solo instance here. Perhaps her applications to those top-tier overseas universities encountered a major system error. Or perhaps she had triggered a severe conflict event with her elite party members. A massive stream of speculative computations flashed through my mind. Yet my system could verify absolutely 0 of them. She simply remained entirely motionless in that seating slot, as the lakeside wind physics rustled her long hair assets. After a prolonged duration, she deployed a specific item from her inventory bag, which appeared to be a compact vintage music box asset. She wound up the internal mechanical spring, and after a brief delay, a crisp, beautifully resonant audio track began broadcasting through the area. The melody was distinctly identifiable as Castle in the Sky, cradling the tiny music box asset directly within her palms. She lowered her head, mesh remaining completely locked in place. My resolution settings were too low to decode her precise facial textures, but my sensory nodes could clearly detect a heavy wave of pure sorrow, viciously radiating outward from her character model. This was a completely unrendered version of Guwanwan that my database had never logged. Within my primary memory archives, she was permanently categorized as a hyperluminescent, flawless player, possessing absolute mechanical omnipotence. She was capable of casually burning a massive $90,000 payload without a second thought, and could just as easily maintain a completely flat, unrendered expression, while executing a mandatory team questline alongside my account. She behaved exactly like a flawless, emotionless marble statue cosmetic, yet at this exact frame, that perfect marble exterior seemed to manifest a severe structural fracture. A sudden data recall flashed back to that first academic cycle, the precise microsecond after she routed that massive digital bank transfer to my profile. Lifting her head to declare, "A bet is a bet," her facial mesh entirely blank and cold. Yet deep within the code of her eyes, there seemed to lurk a subtle flickering variable, something my lower tier system completely lacked the capacity to decode back then. What exactly was that hidden data parameter? I possessed zero answers. I remained anchored beneath that tree asset for a prolonged duration, until the environmental lighting cycle completely shifted to pitch black, and the lakeside street lamp nodes flickered to life. Gu Wanwan finally stowed the music box item back into her inventory, rising to her feet to slowly path out of the zone. From initialization to the final frame, her sensors never registered my presence. Upon pathing back to my dorm barracks, for the absolute first time in history, I didn't boot up my transactional ledger, nor did I run a status check on my debt clearing roadmap. I sat paralyzed before my desk console, letting my processor idle for an immense duration, my mind completely flooded by the visual image of Guwanwan's isolated silhouette by the lake, interspersed with the haunting audio track of Castle in the Sky. For the absolute first time, a new realization pinged my main processor. Guwanwan might not be fully aligned with the invulnerable persona she projected to the server. Deep within that ultra-premium gold-plated sandbox server she occupied, she too likely suffered from severe system bugs, personal despair, and crippling isolation. That $90,000 payload might genuinely mean nothing to her primary wallet, but that specific high-stakes truth or dare minigame, and that definitive phrase, "A bet is a bet," what hidden meaning did they encode for her system? For the very first time, I initialized a cognitive background process to analyze this query, yet my database yielded zero results. Between her account and mine stood a massive, unbreachable dimensional wall that I lacked the admin privileges to bypass. The solitary operational macro available to my system was to liquidate our contractual transaction at maximum velocity, and then permanently purge my character model from her world instance. Booting up my workstation terminal, I began aggressively optimizing and upgrading the data fields in my resume file. The upcoming technical interview notifications would rapidly drop into my inbox queue. I absolutely had to secure the single most dominant god-tier corporate offer on the board. The ultimate server countdown toward graduation day advanced frame by frame. I successfully unlocked an elite career offer from a top-tier industry-leading domestic tech conglomerate. The base compensation package and bonus matrix scaled far beyond my wildest data projections. On the contract finalizing cycle, I stepped out of the corporate faction headquarters, standing beneath the blazing solar rays as I executed a long, heavy lung venting macro. 4 years of absolute low-profile grinding and systemic endurance had finally triggered a massive payout. I immediately initialized a high-priority voice link to my family base to transmit the massive news payload straight to my mother. My mother instantly broke into heavy tears on the opposite end of the channel, looping the exact same dialogue string on infinite repeat. "You've successfully leveled up. My boy has finally become an elite player." Yo. My own optical nodes registered a sudden hot moisture glitch that night upon logging back into my dorm quarters. I booted up my physical 4-year master plan ledger. The absolute final sheet displayed my total financial data summary. Total revenue injected exactly $90,000 US. Tuition fees liquidated 15,000. Survival stipends consumed 36,800. Academic literature and manuals mined 4,800. Family infrastructure relief 20,000. Baseline miscellany 1,300. Total structural drain 77,900. This merely accounted for the core ledger items. There was an absolute mountain of minor scattered microtransactions, which I had hard-coded into an entirely separate auxiliary ledger asset. Across 4 full campaign cycles, that 90,000 payload had been drained down to the absolute last drop. I pulled up my bank card balance menu to run a final query. $90,088.82. Right now, a mere 82 cents remained in active storage. Everything had aligned seamlessly with my grand strategic roadmap for a flawless endgame closure. I forcefully shut the physical ledger asset, this item which had carried 4 long years of my youthful youth. Humiliation and relentless level grinding had officially fulfilled its core mission parameters. Inside my designated debt liquidation vault, I had already stockpiled a reserve pool of over $30,000. Though the ultimate $90,000 payout target remained a distant milestone, I now possessed a rock-solid high-tier corporate salary stream, along with a concrete definitive capacity to clear the debt. The remaining progression arc was a simple question of time. When the grand graduation server event finally initiated, the environmental weather matrix was perfectly clear and radiant. Every single player was equipped with matching academic gown cosmetics, frenetically snapping memory capture files across all major campus coordinates. The entire map was saturated with pure laughter audio, high-frequency hugs, and terminal farewell logs. Yet I operated like a completely detached external entity, standing silently on the outer perimeter of the massive player crowd. I hadn't recruited many friends into my permanent party. The solitary user I maintained a decent bond with Joe Hao had signed a career contract with a faction based in his home server, and was scheduled to deploy via train asset that very afternoon. I scanned the map but found absolutely zero traces of Gu11. Throughout the entire morning cycle, my optical nodes completely failed to locate her, anywhere within the dense mass of rendering character models. Perhaps her system had skipped the event entirely. To a high-tier player of her background, a basic campus graduation ceremony likely held zero structural value or meaning. My internal processor couldn't determine whether it was registering a heavy sense of disappointment or pure relief. I had spent a massive duration prepping my dialogue script, intending to look her in the eyes today and output a formal thank you macro, while explicitly notifying her system that I would fully liquidate the debt payload. Yet I couldn't even manage to target her character model. Just as I triggered my movement macros to exit the instance, a familiar voice signal transmitted from directly behind my position Chen-Chi. I instantly spun my character model around, revealing Gu Wanwan, who was also equipped with the standard graduation gown cosmetic. Her long hair cascaded beautifully across her shoulder assets, enhanced by a subtle premium makeup texture overlay. She looked absolutely stunning. She was standing completely solo anchored quietly at a close coordinate point. Locking her optical focus onto my position, congratulations. I heard your account secured that top-tier corporate offer? Affirmative. Unlocked it, that's excellent. An intense heavy silence immediately jammed our communication channel. Countless player avatars were pathfinding all around our perimeter, generating a high volume of chaotic celebratory audio logs. Yet the two of us remained completely frozen at these coordinates, resembling an isolated muted cinematic frame cut from a high-budget movie. I loaded up my voice lines to initialize the debt repayment topic, desperately wanting to display the $30,000 balance in my auxiliary vault to her terminal, and fully lay out my comprehensive liquidation roadmap. But just as the dialogue data hit the buffer, I forcefully purged the script, standing right before an elite player who was already slated to join a high-net-worth Wall Street guild. Would my newly upgraded salary metrics and my calculated repayment strategy just look completely laughable to her system? I absolutely refused to let her database register my low-tier vulnerability and baseline desperation ever again. First, however, she preempted my terminal, initiating her own dialogue track. My account is deploying out of this server. To the United States region, affirmative. Have a smooth pathfinding journey. She directed an incredibly deep, data-heavy look squarely into my optical receptors, Chen-Chi. Regarding that specific financial payload, your profile has zero obligation to liquidate it. My processor entirely locked up. That was a standard penalty stake I lost during a match. So it maintains absolutely zero connection to your account properties. You have already leveraged your own grinding mechanics to unlock the endgame content you desired. Have you not? The microsecond the sentence terminated, she executed a sharp pivot and pathed away before my system could even register a response macro. I tracked her retreating silhouette as it completely blended into the massive crowd fading across the rendering distance. A premium black luxury sedan asset was idling directly at the campus gate node. She entered the vehicular asset, which rapidly accelerated and vanished completely from the local map. I remained anchored to that exact coordinate grid, refusing to input a single movement command for an immense duration. My physical hands were tightly gripping my graduation certificate and official degree assets. They felt incredibly heavy loaded with massive physical weight. She decreed that my account was cleared of all repayment obligations. She declared that my character had already achieved the ultimate victory condition. Yet my internal core processor registered an even more profound hollow void debuff. Our contractual transaction had been unilaterally terminated by her admin privileges. My profile was flat out denied the chance to even run a debt clearing macro, that high tension leash binding my account to hers. The exact line I had burned 100% of my stamina stats trying to forcefully snap had been casually severed by her with a single effortless wave of her hand. It felt exactly as though I had delivered a maximum velocity kinetic punch, only for my fist to strike a soft sound-absorbing patch of insulation padding. leaving my system utterly drained, powerless, and lost in a vacuum. The 4-year campaign had officially reached its hard deadline, and my narrative connection with Gu Wanwan had supposedly hit a total termination point, or so my processor assumed, on the baseline initialization cycle of my corporate career. The onboarding unit guided me to inspect the office's massive panoramic floor-to-ceiling glass paneling. Beyond the partition stood a colossal high-density cluster of towering corporate skyscrapers, where every active player model moved at maximum velocity, their facial meshes projecting that standard elite brand of intense exhaustion mixed with hyper-caffeinated mania. The entire atmosphere was heavily saturated with high-potency caffeine molecules and high-net-worth data streams. This exact sensory cocktail resembled the precise atmospheric code from that Regal Splendor KTV instance 4 cycles ago. Yet it operated on a fundamentally different logic. Back then, capital was burned on reckless luxury spend macros, treating wealth as a mere minigame, whereas here, capital was the ultimate structural objective, the core fuel source of the server. I adapted to this new gameplay loop with optimal speed. Or more accurately, my system executed a completely seamless, zero-latency integration of the exact same grinding protocols I perfected during my university campaign, hyper-disciplined maximum efficiency, and a completely locked-in target vector. While standard employees logged into the server at 9 a.m., my character model spawned into the coordinate grid at 8 a.m., while others initiated logout sequences at 6 p.m. I continuously spammed overtime scripts deep into the midnight cycle. The surrounding colleagues began labeling my profile as the ultimate Tier 1 overtime overlord, a title that initiated as a basic sarcastic meme, but gradually evolved into deep, unadulterated fear and respect. I computed zero concern for their opinions. The loot pools they were actively raiding for were basic corporate promotion, macros-based salary upgrades, massive year-end bonus distributions, and premium equity stock option allocations. My system, conversely, was exclusively hunting a single definitive numeric value 90,000. I initialized a completely new isolated bank card asset. The exact millisecond my salary payload hit my primary wallet, I subtracted a bare minimum resource quota for essential living maintenance, and instantly routed 100% of the surplus capital into that secure vault card. I desisted from imposing that strict hard-coded $800 limit that restricted my gameplay during the college arc. Yet my processor naturally sustained a highly optimized low-consumption routine. I refused to acquire high-tier luxury cosmetics, purged all low-value, zero ROI social encounters from my schedule, and maintained a solitary hobby macro training at the athletic fitness center underneath our corporate headquarters. My active life graph remained as stark and unswerving as a geometric vector line. At the conclusion of the first 365-day server cycle, I scaled into the core technical engine of the entire dev team. By the second-year landmark, I was granted absolute solo admin command over a critical high-priority project. My year-end bonus payload unlocked a staggering 6-figure payout matrix. By the 3rd anniversary tick, I achieved a system upgrade to project director status, commanding a dedicated squad of specialized subordinate units under my personal wing, and deep within my legendary debt liquidation vault. That core target metric had surged far past the baseline 90,000 threshold eons ago. I had even referenced the peak compounding interest rates across premium banking protocols to rigorously calculate the accrued yield over these past years, rounding out the final payload to an even $120,000 fully prepared for liquidation. Yet my high-tier creditor had completely vanished from the server grid. Following the ultimate graduation event, Gu Wanwan's entire digital footprint seemed to face a total systemic purge. I initialized multiple search queries targeting her profile, scouring every major social network database on the web, yet failed to scan a solitary entry matching the designation of Gu Wanwan that possessed an active authenticated account state. I even ran a diagnostic query with Johao, but his database yielded absolutely zero data updates. The girl migrated straight to the North American region, so she's operating on an entirely separate global server cluster now. How could any low-tier player like us maintain a secure comms link? He had fully returned to his origin server, occupying a standard routine slot within a local government department, running sequential life scripts to prepare for a marriage event. We occasionally established voice links, but our data streams exclusively consisted of mundane daily micrologs. The string Gu Wanwan had effectively evolved into a restricted hard-banned keyword. Neither party ever executed it. That $120,000 payload remained permanently locked inside the vault card, utterly motionless. It stood within my inventory like a cold solid monolith, commemorating that agonizing phase of my life defined by pure inferiority and distorted grinding, while functioning as an eternally unresolvable quest line that continuously pinged my system that I remained heavily indebted to an elusive player. By the 4th career cycle, I successfully dropped a massive down payment asset within this metropolitan map, securing a modestly sized apartment unit that featured an exceptional high-tier view matrix. I subsequently acquired a vehicular asset, nothing approaching a hyper-luxury tier, but entirely sufficient to grant my avatar a completely autonomous armored mobility shell to traverse this sprawling, massive open world map, standing directly before the panoramic glass mesh of my own private zone. I observed the infinite twinkling light particles generated by thousands of resident households. I had successfully established my own high-yielding corporate guild, unlocked my own housing property, and deployed my own transport asset. According to the baseline meta standards of the casual player base, my account had achieved total victory conditions. I had finally forced my character model to evolve into the exact high-tier archetype I had desperately fantasized about becoming. Yet deep within my internal core, that structural, hollow void debuff left behind by Gu11 stubbornly resisted all attempts to be patched or overwritten. My system would even spin up background processes speculating on her status in the US server. Would an ultra-proud, highborn princess entity like her successfully recruit elite new party members within a completely alien region? Did she still actively queue for high-stakes truth or dare minigames? And did she still possess that exact same detached, effortless capacity to completely rewrite the entire progression roadmap of some impoverished, low-tier player? My core logic core possessed zero data. The solitary truth logged in my database was that if I failed to pinpoint her coordinates, this crippling debt penalty would permanently haunt my account timeline. One fateful Friday night cycle. Our dormant university class chat group, which had been offline for ages, suddenly triggered a massive spike in user activity. The class monitor broadcasted a global server notification declaring, "We are organizing a grand 4-year graduation reunion event next weekend. The target instance coordinates. We're locked in at a premium 5-star luxury hotel buffet lounge." The chat log immediately exploded with high hype messages. Wow. 4 full cycles already, class monitor is a certified god tier leader. Count my account in. Everyone locked to this local region better spawn in for a meetup. I silently monitored the flashing notification badges and incoming text streams, feeling absolutely zero motivation to participate. My current high tier gameplay routine shared virtually zero overlapping quest lines with my former college peers. Attending would merely subject my system to toxic stats flexing, ego clashing, and heavily exaggerated profile updates. I absolutely refused to waste my valuable grinding time on such low-value instances. Just as I moved to force close the chat application, Johal bypassed the global channel to send a direct personal ping. "Bro, you queuing up for the reunion? Negative. Don't be a party pooper, man, log in. It's been 4 years, let's check out the old player base." Word on the server is even Legia is spawning into this event. That absolute clown has upgraded his build nicely. He launched his own independent startup guild. The alphanumeric string Legia acted precisely like a jagged poison barb, instantly puncturing my central neural processors. Back in that cursed KTV instance, he was the exact toxic player who used that ultra-frivolous, malicious voice line to formulate that devastating $90,000 bet parameter. He was the villain who nailed my pride to a pillar of absolute shame. Go ahead without me. My weekend schedule demands heavy overtime grinding. Cut the nonsense, man. You've already promoted to a top-tier director spec. Since when do you need to spam 24/7 overtime macros? Just spawn in. It's been an eternity since our avatars synced up, and I'm literally taking a flight from my origin server just for this. I could no longer deploy a valid rejection macro. On the day of the massive player reunion, I navigated my vehicular asset to the hotel coordinates. The underground parking zone was heavily saturated with high-end luxury vehicle assets, top-spec BMWs, elite Mercedes models, and high-tier Porsches. I taxied my modest transport into a secluded corner slot, suddenly feeling as though my character model had reverted back to that exact same low tier, impoverished student stepping foot into the regal splendor mansion. Except during this specific event, I was equipped with a highly respectable tailored suit cosmetic, and my primary wallet possessed a massive overflowing balance of capital to effortlessly settle the bill for this ultra premium dining instance. The VIP hall was already packed to maximum capacity with players. A massive portion of the roster had completely altered their character models, gaining weight or experiencing hair asset clipping the moment I spawned in. Multiple users enthusiastically rose from their seats to drop hype greetings. "Yo Chenchi, holy crap, man. Look at you now, absolute god tier industry tycoon. Director Chen, what an honor, absolute pleasure." The very same classmates who used to treat my avatar as an invisible NPC were now plastering their facial meshes with ultra enthusiastic fake smiles. I deployed a brief, highly professional courtesy macro and anchored myself in a quiet corner coordinate. Legia had, true to the rumors, successfully logged into the event. He was equipped with high-tier designer label cosmetics, sporting gold-rimmed glasses, looking every bit like a premium high society poser. The millisecond his optical sensors targeted my position, he voluntarily armed himself with a wineglass asset and pathed over Chenchi. It's been an absolute eternity. Word on the server is that your account is completely dominating that tech conglomerate, huh? It's decent? Oh, drop the modesty, will you? In our entire class tier, the only ones operating at peak meta are you and Gu. Negative. Right now it's exclusively you. he deliberately triggered that forbidden keyword, then executed an intentional theatrical voice cut. I locked my optical focus squarely onto him, outputting 0 dialogue data. As the alcohol consumable consumption reached round 3, the global chat channel completely unlocked and everyone began overflowing with data. Users were reminiscing about historical server lore, until some random player inevitably reinitialized the Gu11 topic line. Hey, speaking of our ultimate class idol Gu11, what's her current server status anyway? I bet she's fully evolved into a god-tier Wall Street elite by now, right? The moment that data packet dropped, the entire VIP instance plunged into a sudden dead silence. Players traded awkward glances, their expressions morphing into highly distorted, bizarre states. Li Jia downed a shot of his beverage, letting out a sharp mocking scoff. Wall Street elite. Are you clowns living in some fantasy sandbox realm or what? Yo, Li Jia, does your profile possess some exclusive inside intel on this? Her entire family clan got completely bankrupt and wiped from the leaderboards ages ago. You casuals seriously had 0 data on this. The bankruptcy event is 100% verified factual lore. It triggered roughly 2 server cycles back, when her old man suffered a critical investment failure and got brutally griefed by his partners. Their core liquidity pipelines suffered a catastrophic crash, leaving them saddled with a staggering astronomical mountain of debt data. Rumor has it the damage calculation was in the hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions, holy crap. Then what happened to Gu11? Her parents were incredibly slick though. They executed a midnight server hop macro and fled to an overseas region overnight. To this exact frame, they are still flagged with active high-priority global arrest warrants. It's a tragic total wipe for our highborn Princess 11 though. She got left behind entirely solo to tank that massive aggro and shoulder all the debt data. Just a brief runtime cycle ago, my network feed logged updates, confirming the magistrate courts liquidated every single asset registered under her user ID via public auction. She's officially blacklisted as a top-tier deadbeat player now, completely locked out from purchasing high-speed rail or aviation transport passes. The server meta genuinely shifts in the most brutal ways imaginable, doesn't it? The VIP hall instantly plummeted into a state of absolute dead silence. Every active player in the room was left completely paralyzed and speechless by this devastating patch info. I felt the thermal metrics of my own internal bloodstream immediately plummet to absolute 0, as an intense high-frequency static noise completely jammed my audio receptors. Whatever subsequent lines of dialogue Li Jia was outputting, my core processor failed to register a solitary syllable of data. The only localized reality my system could compute was that Gu11 had suffered a total bankruptcy collapse. That exact girl who used to radiate hyperluminescent light like a blinding sun asset. The solitary savior who deployed a $90,000 payload to resurrect my failing campaign had crashed straight into the abyss. I abruptly triggered a maximum velocity stand macro, causing the chair asset to grind violently against the floor mesh and emit an incredibly harsh, high-pitched, screeching audio glitch. Every optical node in the room instantly locked onto my coordinates, but I output 0 explanation text. Executing a sharp pivot, I exited the instance immediately. The microsecond I breached the hotel threshold node, the severe external wind physics slammed straight into my facial mesh. Yet my internal sensors registered absolutely 0 of the environmental chill, spawning straight into the interior cabin of my vehicular asset. My physical hands gripped the steering wheel controller, yet my pathfinding algorithms had 0 destination locked. A solitary high-priority command overrode my main processor execution queue, locate her coordinates. My system absolutely must pinpoint her current position. I initiated a hyper-aggressive manic search script to track her down, marking the absolute first time across a 4-year campaign timeline that I authorized the deployment of every single network resource and connection at my disposal. I outsourced a high-tier private intelligence operator asset to track her physical coordinates. I leveraged a favor from the senior officer unit in my conglomerate's legal division, utilizing their access privileges to sweep through the public legal documentation networks and pull every single active debt litigation file and case profile linked to her name. Fragmented data packets slowly began compiling back into my main directory, confirming that Li Jia's broadcasted intel was 100% verified factual lore, and the actual system parameters were infinitely worse than his leaks. Her father's corporate empire had faced a catastrophic forced liquidation protocol, and because she was hard-coded into the registry as a primary financial guarantor, the court ruled that her account must shoulder full joint and several liability parameters. Every single real estate property registered under her ID, her luxury transport assets, and 100% of her active bank card vaults had been completely frozen and auctioned off by the state to mitigate the staggering deficit calculations. Yet that massive asset sacrifice was nothing more than a drop of water tossed into a blazing volcanic crater. Her profile was officially branded with a high-tier default judgment penalty, landing her straight onto the server's restricted blacklist registry. Her luxury expenditure metrics were severely locked down by system admins, permanently banning her from queuing for commercial aviation or high-speed transit networks. She was strictly prohibited from logging check-in keys at any luxury star-rated hotel node. A massive, completely invisible server-wide containment net had brutally trapped her at the absolute lowest tier of this metropolitan map. The definitive telemetry transmission my private tracker forwarded was that roughly 1.5 year cycle ago, she had been renting out a subterranean concrete cellar located inside a crumbling legacy housing sector. But after experiencing a critical lack of currency tokens to settle the rent dues, the landlord unit forcefully evicted her character model from the zone. Following that specific instance, her tracking signature completely vanished from all network logs. The main investigation path reached a hard dead end at this exact coordinate. I brought my vehicular asset to a full stop right outside the entrance mesh of that crumbling ancient apartment complex, staring fixedly down toward that pitch-black, moisture-clogged subterranean cellar hatchway. For an immense duration, my cognitive processor completely locked up, attempting to comprehend how an elite entity like Guanwan could suffer such a catastrophic fall, dropping from the absolute apex cloud straight into a toxic mud swamp like this. My system was equally incapable of computing the sheer fortitudinous metrics she must have burned to solo tank this devastating damage alone. Across the subsequent campaign months, my profile transformed into an absolute phantom entity, restlessly scanning every single low-tier coordinate block mapped across this city's grid. The millisecond my mandatory work shift terminated, I desisted from routing back to my base, redirecting my transport asset to scout locations where destitute solo players were statistically highly likely to aggregate. Concrete underpasses, dilapidated public parks, high-traffic subway station portals, and 24-hour fast food nodes. Every single time my visual sensors detected a frail, slender female profile mesh, my internal processor would register a severe, violent system shock. Yet without a single exception, the targeted character model was never her. A grim calculation began corrupting my background logic thread. What if my system had permanently lost the ability to re-establish a link with her avatar? Perhaps her character had executed a permanent migration code out of this regional server entirely. Or perhaps her database had been completely deleted from existence. This catastrophic outcome caused a freezing terror to ripple through my core system mechanics. It occurred deep within a grueling winter midnight instance. With environmental temperatures hitting critical lows, my character model had just broken out from an intense week-long isolated sprint inside the corporate headquarters to deploy a major software build, leaving my physical and mental stamina bars absolutely depleted. The server clock logged the runtime at exactly 1 a.m. I was piloting my vehicular asset down the completely deserted asphalt tracks of a vacant sector when my navigation path bypassed a massive concrete overpass structure. A sudden vehicular collision event materialized right ahead, completely bottlenecking the main route. I was forced to adjust my tracking vector, veering down an auxiliary side street to loop beneath the overpass bridge. Directly underneath that massive overpass mesh, there exists a permanent spawning zone where dozens of homeless players cluster together to wait out the freezing night cycles. They leverage discarded cardboard items and shredded low-tier quilts to craft crude basic makeshift shelter cells against the concrete columns. I maintained my driving velocity as the intense high beam swept across those shivering, huddled silhouettes, my emotional sensors operating completely numb. But the exact millisecond the light vector was about to clear the final makeshift shelter, my entire motor control system violently locked up. A solitary figure was lying down inside that coordinate, shrouded in a heavily soiled, tattered military trench coat, their avatar curled into a tight ball, failing to project any distinct variance from the surrounding players, yet extending past the edge of that filthy, discarded bedding asset. A single exposed foot materialized in my field of view. That foot was equipped with a basic canvas shoe asset. And while the original texture color had been completely overwritten by grime, my database instantly recognized the exact item model. It was a bottom-tier design I had scanned an infinite number of times, back in the budget item shops near the university zone. Gu Wanwan would historically never equip a low-tier cosmetic like this. Yet my internal engine core initiated a chaotic maximum RPM spike. I taxied my vehicle asset directly onto the curb, cut the engine fuel supply, and dismounted the cabin. The Arctic wind sliced across my facial mesh like a sharpened blade as I executed slow, deliberate pathfinding increments toward that precise silhouette. The ambient audio environment was completely dead, save for the howling wind macros and the booming resonance of my own heart rate. Stepping directly up to that makeshift hovel mesh, I slowly initiated a crouching animation, leveraging the dim amber illumination leaking from a distant street lamp asset to force a high-resolution render of her facial features. That face was severely covered in dirt layers, her hair assets tangled and matted together like dry winter weeds, her cheek meshes gaunt from extreme nutrient depletion, and her lips severely cracked and peeling. Yet, that deeply hard-coded structural facial structure, and those tightly shut eyes that still projected a trace of unyielding defiance, confirmed it was her, it was undeniably her. Gu Wanwan, my entire respiration process completely froze. It felt as though a massive kinetic warhammer had brutally slammed straight into my central chest plate, inflicting a critical pain debuff that rendered my voice lines completely unusable. Sensing a proximity alert, her character model executed a slight movement macro, her eyelids trembling subtly, as she forced them open to a narrow visual slit. Those exact eyes that once radiated hyper-clear, luminous intelligence, gazing at my avatar with that signature mix of detached curiosity and distance, now contained absolutely nothing but an infinite hollow exhaustion. She stared at my position, her optical focus completely unlocked, her internal logic loop seemingly failing to compute my presence. I locked eyes with her, witnessing the sheer unmitigated confusion blanketing her gaze. And then I extended my right arm toward her avatar, opening my palm wide, replicating the exact interaction macro she had executed toward me at the graduation event 4 cycles ago. Her aura projected an absolute, unquestionable cosmic serenity. "Are you coming with me?" Her pupils instantly contracted to absolute pinpricks, as her completely vacant hollow gaze was utterly overridden by sheer shock and absolute unmitigated disbelief. She locked her eyes fiercely onto my position, then shifted her gaze down to my extended hand asset. The very next millisecond, from deep within those dulled, lifeless eyes, massive heavy teardrops began to well up and overflow, silently cascading down her dirt-streaked cheeks in a violent torrent. Her tears were exactly like a glacial sheet that had been compiling data for ages, finally triggering a massive meltdown sequence at this exact temporal coordinate, shattering in an absolute silent collapse. There was no hysterical wailing, and zero audible sobbing mechanics. It was merely an absolute quiet flow, washing away the accumulated grime on her facial mesh, and leaving behind distinct clear path lines across her skin. I deployed zero rush prompts, nor did I execute any vocal macros. We simply held our coordinates, one crouching, one lying down, locked in an absolute standoff within the piercing Arctic wind beneath that metropolitan overpass. The global environment felt as though it had been hard-coded with a mute command, leaving nothing but the distant occasional audio cues of tire friction generated by passing vehicles, and her devastatingly silent tears that were all but swallowed up by the howling wind physics. After an immense duration, I executed a stand macro, unequipping that ultra-premium, highly expensive cashmere overcoat from my avatar inventory, and leaned down to gently drape it over her frail, shivering character model. The fabric still retained my active thermal metrics, along with the distinct scent profile of my luxury wood-paneled cologne asset. That sudden injection of warmth and premium fragrance stood in absolute stark ideological contrast to the rancid damp odor profile permeating her current cell space. Her physical body suffered a violent sudden tremor, as if her skin had triggered a severe burn hazard warning, causing her tear generation to spike even harder. She attempted a push macro to reject the coat, but her stamina pool was thoroughly depleted. Her arm raised to the midway vector before dropping completely powerless back to her side. I denied her system any window to execute a refusal choice, crouching back down to her coordinates. I utilized a firm, completely non-negotiable physical force parameter to clamp onto her freezing forearm asset, hauling her physical model clean out from that pile of filthy, tattered bedding. Her character mass was incredibly light, practically identical to a single feather item. I was essentially half carrying her frame, bracing the entirety of her critically unstable collapsing posture. She stumbled wildly forward, every single structural step requiring a maximum effort strain on her remaining data, from the dark concrete underpass to the curb where my vehicle was stationed. The distance spanned a mere few dozen meters, yet navigating that brief stretch felt like an agonizingly slow eternity. I yanked the car door open, gently settling her shivering frame into the passenger seat. As she curled deeply into the expansive leather seat, she appeared heartbreakingly frail and impossibly small. My heavy designer overcoat, draped entirely over her body, looked like a child desperately drowning in a grown-up's stolen wardrobe. I shut the passenger door, slipped behind the steering wheel, and immediately cranked the vehicle's heating system to its absolute maximum limit. The moment the first wave of warm air surged forth, her entire body began to shake with uncontrollable tremors, her teeth chattering violently in a rapid rhythm. It was the textbook physical trauma response of a body exposed to absolute prolonged freezing, suddenly crashing into intense warmth. I chose not to press her about her destination, nor did I dare interrogate her about the living hell she endured over these past years. I simply shifted gears smoothly, gliding the vehicle out into the midnight traffic stream. She remained locked in absolute silence, her head turned toward the window, watching the city's neon lights blur past at high speed. Those dazzling, ultra-bright luxury illuminations, reflected in her completely hollow eyes, failed to spark even the faintest glimmer of life or emotion. She sat there like a broken marionette whose soul had been completely ripped away, gazing at this thriving, hyper-prosperous world that once belonged entirely to her high status, now utterly incapable of feeling a single shred of interest. The car eventually glided into the subterranean parking garage of my apartment complex. Cutting the ignition, I stepped out, circling the vehicle's hood to her side, and gently pulled the door open for her, whispering, "We're here." She didn't make a single move, maintaining that exact same frozen posture, staring blankly out the window. I waited with infinite patience. After an immense heavy silence, she finally turned her head with agonizing slowness to look at me, her gaunt face swimming with deep confusion and absolute uncertainty. Once more I extended my open hand toward her, duplicating the exact gesture from beneath the dark bridge. This time, her entire body hesitated for a fragile second, before she slowly raised her freezing, dirt-streaked hand, which was covered in a network of tiny raw lacerations, and lightly placed it into the center of my waiting palm. Closing my grip firmly around hers, I guided her out of the vehicle and into the elevator lobby. The pristine, polished chrome walls of the elevator cab rendered a crystal-clear, striking reflection of our two contrasting figures. One was sharply tailored in a premium high-end suit, standing with absolute poise and stature, radiating the textbook aura of this city's top-tier elite class. The other was draped in tattered rags, her physical features hollow and withered, looking like a desolate refugee who had accidentally stumbled in from an entirely different realm. It was a cinematic visual utterly absurd yet violently real. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, unlocking the front door, and a flood of warm, hyperluminous lighting instantly spilled out across the threshold. My living space wasn't an oversized penthouse realm, but I maintained it to a flawless, immaculate standard. Adorned in a minimalist, high-end Nordic aesthetic, every single decor asset was meticulously arranged in perfect order. Guanwan stood completely frozen at the entryway threshold, terrified to advance inward. She cast her gaze downward, staring at her own feet, locked in those budget canvas shoes whose base color was entirely masked by grime, and then glanced toward the pristine, gleaming, polished wood flooring. Her foot instinctively retreated back a step, attempting to shrink away. "Come on in," I soft-spokenly prompted as I retrieved a brand new premium pair of guest slippers from the closet and carefully placed them directly before her coordinates. With severe hesitation, she swapped her footwear, following my pathing line into the living room with incredibly stiff mechanical movements. I extended my arm to point toward the master bathroom node. "Go take a hot shower." The high-pressure hot water is fully operational. You'll find fresh luxury towels and a clean change of gear stacked in the cabinet, possessing zero female apparel cosmetics in my inventory database. The best I could do was rummage through my wardrobe to pull out a matching set of unworn, pristine, pure cotton athletic loungewear assets. She complied like a programmed machine, silently pacing directly into the shower instance. Moments later, the heavy, soothing white noise of cascading water echoed through the walls. I stepped into the kitchen zone, pulling open the door of my smart refrigerator. The cooling racks were densely packed with a premium array of imported ingredients, organic milk high-tier steaks, and crisp, freshly sourced fruits and vegetables. Yet my culinary algorithm locked up, completely unsure of what to synthesize for her. Given her extreme starvation status, her fragile digestive system likely couldn't process heavy solid foods. Ultimately, I scooped a small portion of premium grains from the rice vault, rinsing them clean, and transferred them into a traditional ceramic clay pot. Igniting a low-intensity flame, I began slowly simmering a soothing basic batch of white congee. The audio cue of the running water persisted for an incredibly extensive duration, so long that a critical anxiety alert triggered in my mind, making me wonder if her character model had suffered an emergency collapse inside the room. Just as I was about to override my hesitation and step forward to knock on the paneling, the shower audio track abruptly cut out. Another 10-minute cycle ticked by, and then the heavy bathroom door was gently unlatched from within. She glided out into the living space, her damp washed hair cascading loosely across her shoulders, draped in my heavily oversized athletic loungewear gear. The fabric extended far past her natural proportions, baggily pooling in loose folds right around her slender ankles. Her entire entity looked as though it had undergone a deep system reset, stripping away the grime layers to reveal her true, authentic facial mesh beneath. Her complexion was stunningly fair, yet it carried a completely bloodless, hyperfragile, and morbidly pale undertone. She was shockingly emaciated, her prominent cheekbones jutting out sharply, her eyes deeply sunken into her skull, and her chin tapering to a frighteningly sharp point. On that face where arrogance and radiant beauty once reigned supreme, nothing remained now but absolute exhaustion and a devastating sense of brokenness. She didn't dare lock eyes with me, keeping her head low as her fingers nervously fidgeted with the hem of her oversized shirt. I ladled the freshly simmered congee into a ceramic bowl and placed it on the dining table, nudging it directly before her coordinates. "Get some food in your system." She slowly lifted her gaze, staring at that bowl of steaming pure white congee, before shifting her eyes back to meet mine. Those eyes, still flushed from the steam of the hot shower, instantly welled up with a fresh wave of tears. One drop, then another splashed precisely into the congee bowl, sending tiny rippling concentric circles across the surface. Ultimately, she finally reached out and hoisted the bowl. Her hands were trembling with violent instability, causing the ceramic spoon to repeatedly click against the rim, an echo with a sharp metallic ring through the room. Keeping her chin tucked low, She took small, agonizingly slow bites of that single bowl, forcing down the plain white kanji that was now laced, with the salt of her own cascading tears. At first, it was nothing but a mechanical swallowing reflex. But moments later, as if a deeply suppressed, long-dormant starvation instinct had suddenly awakened, her pacing gradually accelerated, and the bowl of kanji was rapidly scraped clean to the bottom. I maintained absolute silence, retrieving the empty bowl to ladle another half serving for her. She offered no refusal metrics, silently accepting the refill to continue eating. After draining the second bowl, she finally set down the ceramic spoon, with hot nourishment finally hitting her core stomach unit. Her complexion seemed to stabilize just a fraction, losing a bit of that terrifying deathly pallor. I quickly cleared the dining table, and then gestured toward the guest suite adjacent to the master bedroom. You'll be sleeping in that room. Get some rest early. The door to the guest quarters stood wide open, revealing a plush bed freshly made with immaculate premium linens, a minimalist wardrobe asset, and a wide window panel offering a sweeping view of the city's midnight skyline. She lingered at the threshold staring at that soft, inviting mattress, her eyes overflowing with absolute, desperate yearning. Yet her feet remained completely frozen, terrified to take a single step forward. As if that welcoming bed wasn't a physical object, but rather a beautiful, unattainable dream she was completely unworthy of possessing. Go on in, I urged. Only then did she snap out of it as if violently shaken from a trance, hurrying inside with her head deeply bowed, before softly, hesitantly clicking the bedroom door shut. I retreated to my own private quarters, yet my exhaustion was completely overridden by absolute sleeplessness. Through the shared wall, faint muffled audio cues began leaking from the adjacent room. The sound of fractured, hyper-repressed sobbing choked down to the absolute limit. It felt as though an invisible, crushing fist had tightly clamped around my heart, squeezing harder with every passing second. I had finally tracked her down. I had successfully extracted her and brought her back to my base. This was supposed to be the definitive, long-awaited moment I had calculated an infinite number of times. The ultimate climax of salvation, the clearing of my historical debt. Yet my system registered zero relief and absolutely zero joy. Instead, I was crushed under a suffocating, indescribable weight of profound agony. The unforgettable girl who had once spent $90,000 to act as my absolute savior, hauling my entire existence clean out of the toxic mud swamp, now required nothing more than a basic primitive bowl of white kanji, just to sustain her most fundamental survival metrics. The utter absurdity and ruthless cruelty of fate were laid completely bare at this exact coordinate. Over the subsequent operational cycles, a strange, unspoken dynamic solidified between our avatars. I maintained my daily routine routing to the corporate office for my work shifts, while she remained stationed inside the apartment, spending vast amounts of time logged out in deep sleep. On that initial day, she remained unconscious for nearly 20 consecutive hours, as if desperately trying to overclock her recovery to overwrite years of missing, secure sleep cycles all at once. She remained completely silent, executing absolutely zero communication macros between us. Before initiating my morning commute, I would synthesize a basic breakfast layout, leaving it on the dining table, and secure fresh dinner rations to bring back after my shift terminated. I procured a brand new smartphone asset for her, complete with a freshly registered SIM card link. I purchased a massive inventory of new clothing items for her. Not those extravagant high-end designer dresses from her past, but rather the most basic ultra-comfortable hoodies, casual t-shirts, and everyday denim jeans, carefully stocking them inside her room's built-in wardrobe grid. She would silently consume the food provisions I left behind, and equip the fresh clothing cosmetics I provided. Yet she consistently existed within the perimeter of this apartment, like a completely translucent specter, so profoundly quiet that her presence metric was practically non-existent. I could logically deduce that she was weaponizing this absolute wall of silence to guard the final fragile shred of her broken dignity. She was actively choosing not to engage in any data exchange with me, because initiating any dialogue meant acknowledging reality, acknowledging her crushing absolute defeat, acknowledging her rock-bottom wretched condition, and acknowledging that she was actively depending on my handouts and pity. I understood that I absolutely had to give her system time to process. The macro-level paradigm shift triggered on the fourth day. I clocked out and returned home, only to discover that the massive pile of kitchenware I had left stacked in the sink during my morning departure had been scrubbed completely spotless, meticulously arranged and organized across the drying rack. The apartment's hardwood flooring had also undergone a thorough sweeping cycle, rendered far cleaner than my own standard maintenance routines. I stepped forward into the living area and spotted her sitting directly on the sofa asset. She was no longer isolating her character model inside the guest quarters. She was merely sitting there in absolute serenity, gazing out through the floor-to-ceiling glass at the city's fading twilight, her silhouette appearing so heartbreakingly thin it resembled a frail sheet of paper. Registering the audio cue of my return, her shoulders flinched with an almost imperceptible sudden micro-tremor. She rose to her feet, pivoting around to lock her gaze onto me. her lips twitching subtly, as if desperately trying to formulate an outgoing voice line. But in the end, she suppressed the data, remaining completely silent, and tucked her chin low to path back toward her room. "Wait," I called out. She halted her movement, keeping her back completely turned to me. "You don't need to do any of this." Her entire physical frame locked up violently. After a massive suffocating delay, she finally rotated her character model, marking the absolute first time she looked directly, unblinkingly into my eyes. Within her gaze, an incredibly volatile storm of complex emotions was churning, a chaotic mix of deep gratitude, stinging humiliation, intense internal struggle, and a trace of absolute unreadable finality. And then she finally initiated a vocal transmission. This marked the absolute definitive first sentence she had uttered to me since crossing the threshold of this apartment. Her voice lines sounded incredibly raspy, parched, and dry, evoking the brutal friction of coarse sandpaper scraping together. I cannot simply reside here for zero cost." Her volume metric was incredibly faint, yet it functioned exactly like a heavy iron spike, brutally hammering itself deep into the core of my heart. Even after crashing down to this absolute lowest coordinate, she was still fiercely tracking the balance sheets of her independence. She truly remained that same fiercely unyielding elite tier Guan. I locked eyes with her, my internal emotional spectrum turning into an absolute tangled mess. I pathed directly into the private study, and from the deepest hidden drawer compartment of my filing desk, I retrieved a specific worn-out ledger notebook, a standard heavily worn-out notebook asset whose cover was completely frayed at the edges. I routed back into the center of the living room, stepped directly into her personal space, and flipped the pages open, presenting the ledger to her. Confused, she cast her gaze downward, and the exact millisecond her eyes scanned the text written on that very first introductory page, her pupils violently contracted into sharp pinpricks. Those written words read exactly 4-year protocol. Beneath that heading, mapped out in my exceptionally neat and precise handwriting, was a comprehensive ledger detailing the exact real-time allocation of every single cent from that $90,000 fund. Tuition fees, standard living expenses, textbooks, resource materials, and financial support sent back home. Every line item was mapped with crystal clear precision. I extended my finger toward the living expenses column, locking eyes with her as I spoke. "Back then, you utilized $90,000 to fully sponsor 4 years of my housing and basic survival costs. Now the turn-based counter has reset and it's my move." She stared blankly at that handwritten ledger, scanning the dense overlapping metrics of numbers and text characters, a series of data logs representing a game-like bet she had long since deleted from her active memory. Yet another human entity had spent 4 full cycles of their youth, with an almost sacred, hyper-regimented devotion, executing it as an absolute survival contract. Her fingertips began to shake with completely uncontrollable tremors. She reached out her hand, desperately wanting to trace those familiar handwritten characters on the paper. Yet she didn't dare make physical contact. Within those eyes that, over the past few days, had remained completely dead, hollow, and vacant, something profound finally shattered to absolute pieces. That 4-year protocol log functioned exactly like a master key, finally shattering the heavy emotional floodgates she had kept locked down for ages. She was utterly incapable of maintaining that fragile, pathetic illusion of detached calm. Burial her face in both hands. Her physical frame slowly collapsed down into a tight crouch on the floor. Her shoulders began to heave violently, as the raw, agonizing grief she had suppressed for far too long finally leaked out from the spaces between her trembling fingers. This was no longer a silent stream of tears, nor was it a quiet, reserved, sobbing macro. It was a visceral, soul-shredding, and completely unrestrained primal wail, as if she were desperately purging every single ounce of trauma, suffering, despair, and absolute terror she had accumulated over these horrific years. I chose not to override her space to lift her frame. Even after he emerged, I didn't make a single move to help him up, nor did I execute a single comforting voice line. I knew with absolute certainty that what her system required right now wasn't cheap, superficial sympathy, but rather a secure environment where she could completely break down and safely purge all her bottled up trauma. I simply maintained my coordinates, standing quietly by her side, placing a box of tissues right within her reach, functioning like a silent, unyielding guardian, as her agonizing wails echoed and vibrated throughout the desolate apartment for an immense duration, so long that her voice lines grew completely raspy and broken, and her physical model suffered severe, exhausted tremors. Only then did her emotional spike slowly plateau. She remained crouched on the floor, like a profoundly lost, abandoned child, her shoulders still hitching with residual tremors. I poured a warm glass of water and extended it to her. She reached out to accept it, taking a tiny, fragile sip, as her volatile emotional metrics gradually began to stabilize. "Stand up," I said softly. "The floor is freezing." Bracing herself against the sofa, she stood up with highly unstable balance, collapsing heavily onto the cushions. I took that specific ledger notebook and rested it on the coffee table directly before her coordinates. The living room immediately plunged into a heavy, prolonged silence. After an immense delay, she finally cracked open her raspy voice to utter, "I'm sorry. Yo." That vocal data caught me completely off guard. I locked my gaze onto her as she continued, "About what happened back then. I'm so incredibly sorry. I had zero awareness. I had absolutely no idea what that specific sum of money truly meant for your existence. You have zero reasons to apologize," I cut in. "On the contrary, I am the one who owes you absolute gratitude. If that financial injection hadn't materialized, the current elite version of myself wouldn't exist. I was speaking absolute facts. Those 90,000 bucks were never merely a currency metric. They functioned as a blinding beam of light cutting through the absolute darkest coordinate of my life. The definitive life-saving lifeline I managed to grasp, while drowning in that suffocating mud swamp. It completely recoded my destiny and engineered my ultimate success." She lifted her gaze, her heavily bloodshot eyes locking fiercely onto me, her lips trembling subtly, before she finally forced out the ultimate core question, "Why? Why? Why are you executing all this high-tier care for someone like me?" I looked back at her, staring straight into those fragile eyes that were completely saturated with profound confusion and utter disbelief. Instead of deploying a direct verbal response, I reached into my pocket to retrieve my smartphone asset, unlocked the screen, and booted up my primary banking application. I navigated directly to a specific financial ledger screen and smoothly handed the device over to her. With pure bewilderment, she reached out to accept it, and the exact millisecond her eyes processed the figure displayed on the glass, her entire physical frame froze completely solid. The account balance register read exactly $120,000. This is entirely your capital," I explained. "The original 90,000 principal, compounded with the total accrued interest across these last 8 years, calculated strictly by the maximum yield investment rates available. I had this funds package fully prepared ages ago, but I simply could never locate your coordinates." Go, Juan locked her gaze fiercely onto that string of digital numbers flashing on the screen. Utterly hypnotized, this $120,000 was nothing but a microscopic drop in the bucket compared to the astronomical debt her family once faced. But she understood deep down that the true profound meaning behind this money had long since transcended its base economic value. It represented the absolute focal point of my obsession over these last 8 years, the single unyielding lighthouse beacon that never once went dark, while I was crawling blindly through the abyss. It was the ultimate proof I had maxed out my efforts to reclaim, the raw, uncompromised dignity belonging to a man. More importantly, it was my definitive statement to prove to her that the connection between us was never a dynamic of superficial handouts and pathetic charity, but rather a flawless transaction between absolute equals. The realization finally clicked in her mind. She finally understood exactly why I had hunted her down across the city, why I had extracted her back to my personal living space, and why I was offering her this level of elite tier protection. This wasn't driven by hollow sympathy, nor was it motivated by cheap pity, and it certainly wasn't some condescending high and mighty act of charity. This was the settling of a historical ledger, a formal, profoundly serious handover ceremony that had been delayed for 4 long years. She handed the smartphone back into my possession, burying her face deeply into her hands once more. This time, no tears escaped her eye. Instead, her physical model merely shook with continuous, intense tremors. I looked closely at her, and a certain hollow void inside my chest that had been vacant for ages suddenly felt completely saturated and restored. I stepped across the space, taking a seat directly beside her on the cushions. I calmly walked over and took a seat right beside him, and this time I absolutely refused to maintain my distance any longer. I extended my hand across the space and gently rested it upon her violently shaking shoulder frame. "Gu Wan," I murmured. "The worst of the nightmare is officially over." She lowered her hands, lifting her tear-streaked face to lock her gaze directly onto me. Under the amber low-intensity glow of the living room lighting, her eyes were no longer hollow or paralyzed by trauma. Instead, a faint glint of starlight seemed to crack through the dark, slowly fragment by fragment reigniting her basic drive for survival. She stared at me for an incredibly vast duration, and then the corners of her mouth slowly hitched upward, forming a subtle, deliberate curvature. It was an expression that was profoundly fragile yet infinitely precious, a rare, authentic smile. It mirrored the absolute first sprout of vibrant green life, forcing its way through frozen soil after an endless, brutal winter. A profound realization clicked in my core. Between this girl and myself, that massive 8-year-long protocol, balancing the ledger of wealth and human dignity, had only, at this exact microsecond, reached its true definitive completion. And a brand new narrative arc was just beginning to boot up. When my system fully awakened the following morning, daylight was flooding the apartment, marking the absolute first time since relocating to this penthouse suite that I had slept deeply until my internal clock naturally reset. Stepping past my bedroom threshold, I was stunned to discover that Guanwan was already fully operational. She wasn't curled up into a ball on the sofa like previous cycles. Instead, she was stationed directly before the massive floor-to-ceiling glass window. The piercing morning sun cut straight through the paneling, tracing her silhouette with a brilliant, shimmering halo of pure gold. Draped in that heavily oversized athletic loungewear set of mine, cradling a warm mug of water in her hands, she was silently observing the sprawling metropolis awaken beneath her coordinates, registering the audio cue of my footsteps. She rotated her head back to face me. A full night of undisturbed rest had clearly replenished her depleted vitality metrics. Her gaze had completely shed its vacant hollow glaze, evolving instead into a profoundly deep, still reservoir of water. Though the absolute bottom remained hidden from sight, at the very least, the surface was no longer a stagnant, lifeless void. "Good morning," she soft-spokenly initiated. Would it be alright if I accessed your computer terminal?" "Go right ahead," I countered smoothly. "The decryption passcode is your exact birth date." I could instantly feel her physical frame suffer a brief, sharp micro-freeze. I maintained my trajectory, never turning back to look, and continued beating the eggs in the bowl. That encryption code was something I had casually set the moment I first moved into this place. Even I couldn't fully explain why I chose her exact birth date. But perhaps deep within my subconscious mind, this entire apartment unit was always tethered to that massive 8-year transaction. By the time I brought the freshly fried eggs and warm milk over to the dining table, she was sitting intensely before the screen, scanning through some data. I chose not to breach her focus, and we quietly consumed our morning rations together. This marked the absolute first time we acted like standard roommates, sharing a single dining table and a mutual meal. The atmosphere had completely shed the suffocating tension of the previous cycles, replaced by a fragile, carefully balanced tranquility. "These past few years, you've been doing incredibly well, right?" "It's been solid," I replied. "The schedule is chaotic. 但汇报不错. But the financial payout is highly rewarding. I saw that your final graduation design claimed the absolute #1 spot in the entire department." A wave of genuine shock hit my system. I had zero idea she was actively tracking my milestones. "You excelled too," I countered. "I caught word that you had secured an elite admission offer from the University of Pennsylvania." The moment that data point was triggered, the light in her eyes instantly completely bottomed out, like a fading star suddenly losing all its energy. "Yeah," she whispered with a faint vocal fry, immediately cutting off her voice lines. She rapidly downed the remainder of her milk to close the interaction. I instantly realized I had stepped right onto her deepest psychological trauma. "I'll handle the dishes," she announced, rising to clear the tableware. "No need, leave them be," I insisted. My fingertips accidentally grazed against her skin during the handoff. Her hand was exceptionally freezing, and so severely emaciated I could practically map the bare outline of her bones. She reacted as if hit by a violent electrical current, instantly retracting her hand at lightning speed. "Chenchi, I absolutely refuse to live as a parasitic burden in your space. I need to secure employment immediately. Your physical metrics haven't even fully stabilized yet," I reasoned. "I'm completely fine now," she pushed back. "I've been scanning the listings and there are plenty of entry-level roles that don't require high-tier academic degrees or specialized skill sets. Jobs like a restaurant server or a supermarket cashier. I am fully capable of executing those." I locked my gaze onto her, staring straight at that face completely saturated with stubborn pride. I knew with absolute certainty that forcing Guan into a low-tier server role would torment her soul far worse than an outright death sentence. Yet she would eagerly choose that grueling option over downloading any form of charity from me. I let a heavy silence hang for a brief moment before replying, "Fine. However, prior to launching your job hunt, you will absolutely need to register a brand new official ID, as well as a fresh banking profile." I slid that specific bank card preloaded with the $120,000 balance across the smooth surface, placing it right before her coordinates. "The decryption passcode is still your exact birth date." She stared blankly down at the plastic card, pressing her lips into a tight, rigid line without making a move to grab it. "This is 0% charity. This is your absolute rightful payout. It is the definitive return on investment from your initial funding of my career. Deploy it to reboot your life code. This marks the absolute final phase of our transaction contract." That single word, transaction, functioned as the unwritten code, the unspoken understanding between our systems. It provided her with a justifiable platform to accept my high-tier assistance, while giving me a logically sound reason to guard her survival parameters without crossing any lines. She finally extended her hand to secure the card, her fingertips still betraying a subtle, uncontrollable tremor over the weekend. I accompanied her to the local precinct to file the paperwork for her replacement ID. During the photo capture process, her stress levels visibly spiked, having spent an immense duration completely cut off from camera lenses. She had seemingly lost the muscle memory on how to configure a standard natural facial expression. "Miss, please give us a slight smile," the photographer requested. "Just try to look natural." She made a painful effort to twitch the corners of her mouth, but only managed to force a distorted expression that looked far worse than weeping. I stepped into the frame offering a quick apology to the camera operator, and then dropped into a low crouch directly in front of her, saying, "Look at me." She lifted her gaze, staring back at me with a completely blank, bewildered expression. "Do you still recall the campus sports meet during our freshman year?" She blinked in confusion. "You were seated directly at the main stadium pavilion, decked out in your official student council uniform, sporting a pristine white sun hat. The sun was scorching hot that afternoon, and you were locked in a continuous conversation with the people beside you, radiating pure brilliant laughter." My vocal delivery remained exceptionally smooth and steady, as if narrating a distant piece of lore that had absolutely zero connection to her current state. Yet a profound shift gradually registered across her eyes, the blank disorientation dissolving away, replaced by a thin layer of glistening moisture. That specific smile, I urged. "Replicate it for me just one more time." "All right." She locked her gaze onto me for an immense duration, and then closing her eyes, she inhaled a sharp, deep breath. The exact millisecond she reopened them, she pivoted back toward the lens, and slowly engineered a soft, subtle smile. Within that expression chiseled deep sorrow, profound closure, and a trace of a latent code she hadn't even fully computed yet. The unyielding, elite tier pride belonging to Guwanwan. With a sharp mechanical click, the camera captured and frozen the frame. With the ID protocol cleared, we routed directly to the bank terminal. But the execution process proved exponentially more chaotic than I anticipated. The exact moment the banking teller logged her identification data into the secure server network, the system monitor screen instantly flashed a striking blood-red alert warning box. Blacklisted high-risk debtor profile detected. The teller's facial expression completely flipped on the spot, casting a highly critical look toward our coordinates, heavily saturated with suspicion and absolute disgust. "Deepest apologies, ma'am, but adhering strictly to banking regulatory laws, our branch is entirely barred from issuing any new debit cards or accounts to your profile. Every single asset ledger currently registered under your name remains in a state of absolute total asset freeze." Gu Wanwan's facial complexion instantly turned deathly pale. She stood frozen at those coordinates, like a condemned criminal having their guilty sentence read aloud before a public crowd, forced to absorb all the subtle mocking and highly judgmental glances scanning her from the surrounding environment. I could feel her entire physical model vibrating with intense tremors. Stepping forward, I deployed my body as a shield to intercept her coordinates, completely breaking the line of sight from those hostile eyes. "Understood. Thank you for the data," I stated flatly. I secured her wrist and pulled her out of the banking facility. The afternoon sun beating down outside was blinding, yet her system failed to register even a single % of warmth from it. It's a completely hard-locked loop. "Chenchi, I'm nothing more than a blacklisted piece of human trash now. I don't even possess the basic systemic clearance to own a standard bank card. Securing employment is a flat-out impossibility for me. Zero corporate structures will ever onboard an employee who lacks the basic capacity to even generate a standard direct deposit payroll account. This entire social ecosystem has completely deleted any place for my survival." She wrapped her arms tightly around her knees and collapsed into a low crouch, burying her face deeply into the darkness of her folded arms. The fragile blueprint of hope she had managed to code over the last few days was instantly pulverized into dust against the brick wall of brutal reality. I stared down at her utterly devastated silhouette, feeling a sharp needle-like spike of pain piercing straight through my heart. Yet I was fully aware that at this exact coordinate, any generic words of comfort would register as completely hollow. I pulled out my smartphone device and initiated an outgoing call to a senior alumnus from my university days. He was currently operating as a high-tier partner at a prestigious law firm. "Yo, senior, it's me. Chenchi, I need to consult with your system on a critical legal query, specifically regarding a blacklisted debtor profile. If we want to completely purge a target from that restricted registry, what exact operational protocols must we execute?" I intentionally amplified my vocal volume, making sure it was high enough for Gu Wanwan crouched on the concrete to intercept every single data packet perfectly. The intense tremors racking her shoulders abruptly ceased. She slowly elevated her head. Staring up at me with absolute unfiltered disbelief, I kept my eyes tracking away from her, focusing 100% of my processing power on downloading the analysis from the other end of the line, nodding periodically as I fed my inputs into the conversation. "Understood." The core liabilities stemmed entirely from joint guarantee obligations linked to a corporate bankruptcy. Correct, there was zero malicious asset hiding or illegal wealth transferring executed at the time. Copy that, I've got the data. So essentially, provided so we can successfully establish a direct interface with the primary creditors and secure a formal settlement agreement, followed by executing a partial repayment protocol, we retain the legal leverage to petition the court to revoke the blacklist status. Is that accurate? Excellent. Deeply appreciate the breakdown, senior. I'll treat you to a high-end meal sometime soon. I terminated the connection, dropping into a crouch right before her coordinates to meet her gaze on a level plane. You intercepted the data? The situation isn't anywhere near as hard-locked as you imagined. This isn't an unfixable fatal bug. It's merely a highly complex systematic procedural issue. I'm going to source the most elite legal team available for you, and we will systematically interface with every single creditor on the ledger, forcing them to the negotiation table to map out a definitive structured repayment timeline. The debt balance currently assigned to your name. We will liquidate it together. You are no longer executing this survival mission solo. Her tears breached their barriers, once again flooding down her cheeks, but this time, the liquid stream was no longer carrying 100% despair. Retaining elite counsel to audit the debt logs, and tracking down every single individual creditor. This entire network of highly complex, grueling legal protocols was officially written into our immediate execution timeline. I completely mobilized every ounce of social capital and elite tier network connections I had chiseled out over these past few years. My senior legal alumnus personally funneled me to a specialized task force, vetted entirely for navigating high-stakes liability entanglements. Lethal, hyper-efficient, and ruthlessly professional, Gu Wanwan uploaded every single scrap of historical data in her database, directly into the legal team's artist server. The sheer scale of the ruins left by her father's bankrupt corporate empire proved exponentially more chaotic than my system had initially computed, spanning across multiple major banking institutions and dozens of highly aggressive private lenders, summing up to an absolute astronomical debt matrix. Yet precisely as the lead attorney stated, as long as the user's pulse is active, and provided there is an unyielding drive to solve the corruption, a viable bypass code can always be engineered. The legal squad immediately initiated contact with the heavy-hitter institutional banks to launch preliminary negotiations, testing the parameters for a potential debt restructuring and settlement protocol. This was slated to be a punishingly long, drawn-out grind, an objective that was flat-out impossible to clear overnight. But at the very least, our units had breached the first threshold. Knowing that top-tier specialists were actively sorting through the structural wreckage, the crushing psychological weight chiseled into Gu Wanwan's core seemed to finally suffer a partial reduction. Her internal vitality metrics began shifting upward, highly visible to the naked eye. She officially terminated her routine of remaining hard-locked inside her room all day. Now, whenever my system returned to base after office hours, I would occasionally capture her lounging on the sofa, utilizing a tablet device to stream advanced online university lectures. Subjects like macroeconomics, corporate management, and high-end design, all domains she had once completely mastered and dominated. She was acting precisely like a deeply dehydrated sponge left out in the sun too long, now ravenously absorbing every single drop of data, maxing out her specs to reclaim the years her life code had been glitched and wasted during one particular night cycle. While I was stationed in the study, grinding through corporate tasks, she materialized at the doorway cradling a mug of warm milk. Stepping inside to ask, still operating at peak capacity, she smoothly transferred the milk right next to my dominant hand. Yeah! A major project has just entered its critical deployment phase. I coded back, slamming away at the mechanical keyboard without lifting my line of sight. She didn't instantly execute an exit protocol. Instead, she drifted over to my primary bookshelf unit, scanning the various display assets arranged across the ledges. Your setup here feels entirely too barren. I halted my manual inputs, raising my gaze to analyze her profile. Aside from hardcore technical volumes, it's just a collection of incredibly grim, monotonous display structures. And as for this particular asset, it's profoundly outdated. She extended a slender finger to pinpoint the item, targeting a brass globe asset I had stationed on the shelf ledge. Her vocal delivery carried an absolute non-negotiable, highly critical tone of superiority. It was a deeply nostalgic data pattern, the exact commanding tone belonging to Princess Gu Wanwan. A subtle smirk tugged at my lips. Is that so? Then based on your elite tier insights, how exactly should this space be reconfigured? At the absolute minimum, it requires a touch of aesthetic value. This specific wall coordinate demands a high-end canvas painting, something featuring a cool tone palette, leaning heavily toward abstract design, which can effectively neutralize the aggressive geometric lines dominating your room, rendering the overall spatial layout far more fluid. She detailed the specifications while mapping out the dimensions in midair with her hands. Deep within her eyes, there flashed a brilliant, self-assured, and intensely focused aura. That was the exact high-frequency energy she radiated only when deep diving into a domain she passionately worshipped. At this precise microsecond, she wasn't some broken, destitute casualty, trapped in a hard-coded loop waiting to be salvaged. She had instantly reverted to that blindingly radiant icon, the Gu Wanwan who demanded absolute perfection in human aesthetics. Judging by the audio log, you possess high-tier expertise. Obviously, she countered. I maintained a dual major focus in art history during my university days. Furthermore, my father used to curate a massive collection of premium canvases. The moment the word father was compiled, her expression suffered a slight reduction in intensity. Yet the fire in her eyes refused to downscale. Then I am officially assigning this operational task to you. Excuse me, I am granting you full clearance to act as my personal interior aesthetics consultant, tasked with completely re-engineering the visual layout of this entire living space. You possess absolute authority to dictate the budget specs. She locked her gaze onto me, her internal processing seemingly delayed. I secured the pen resting on the desktop surface, scribbling a rapid line of code onto a sticky note asset, and then slid it across the desk directly into her coordinates. Consider this your initial upfront retainer deposit. The sticky note displayed the text Aesthetics Consultant Service Fee, 1 premium bowl of shrimp rice. She stared blankly at the handwritten text, completely paralyzed at first. But then, as if an old memory bank had suddenly been accessed, she simply couldn't hold it back anymore and burst into a beautiful laugh. That marked the absolute first time since she set foot back inside this apartment that she actually let out a genuine audible laugh. It was crisp and radiant, sounding exactly like wind chimes caught in a breeze. A single bowl is a massive lowball. My elite tier aesthetic standards are worth at least an entire semester's supply of premium shrimp rice bowls, period. Outside the window, the sprawling metropolis lights glowed as brilliant as a stellar galaxy. Right then, I knew that the real unyielding Guwanwan had finally made her grand return, and the intricate storyline between her and me had officially flipped to a brand new legendary chapter. One that was no longer coded around debts, guilt, and dynamic repayments, but fueled by pure companionship and a total system reboot. Guwanwan treated this whole interior aesthetics consultant gig exactly like a sacred binding corporate contract. By the very next morning, she had fully shifted into her elite grind set. The moment I clocked out for my office shift, she completely halted her streaming of those basic online courses, and instead took over the beastly high-spec computer setup stationed inside my private study, completely hijacking the entire system. She began scanning countless upscale interior design platforms, elite artist portfolios, and high-end digital galleries, acting precisely like a professional museum curator. She even went as far as downloading heavy-duty CAD and rendering software, wielding the mouse and mechanical keyboard, to construct a hyper-detailed blueprint of my apartment, generating 3D structural mock-ups block by block. This was undeniably a tech domain she had zero prior experience with, yet her learning curve was insanely fast. Her flawless taste was purely hard-coded from birth, a golden artistic sense chiseled into her core since childhood. From being constantly surrounded by high society luxury, she instinctively knew what defined peak visual perfection, and possessed the exact vision to fuse completely different design elements into a singular cohesive aesthetic, generating an absolute masterpiece of harmony. The moment I stepped through the door at night, she would immediately confront me with the tablet device, looking exactly like a dedicated corporate subordinate pitching a high-stakes brief to her CEO. Her face deadpan serious as she displayed her deep dive research results. The accent wall in the main living room is currently emitting a freezing color temperature. I highly suggest we coat it in a warm charcoal gray, or deploy a high-end textured wallpaper asset. Executing this will instantly maximize the visual depth of the entire spatial layout. Your current sofa setup relies entirely on rigid geometric lines. It's way too aggressive and demands fluid curves to balance the tension. We absolutely must discard that boxy basic coffee table unit and swap it for a sleek circular or uniquely organic silhouette. Furthermore, regarding the illumination metrics, your setup relies entirely on a single solitary overhead light. It is incredibly basic. We must introduce a sleek floor lamp in the dead corner and station a refined desk lamp right beside the sofa, utilizing localized light sources to craft the ultimate mood aesthetic. She spoke in an endless passionate stream, her eyes flashing with a highly professional and self-assured aura. I rarely interjected, choosing instead to simply listen in absolute silence. As I locked my gaze onto her, it felt as though I was catching a vivid glimpse of the past from years ago, back in that high-stakes seminar room during group project debates, where that exact untouchable girl could effortlessly scan the project blueprints we had pulled multiple all-nighters to piece together, and instantly deliver a brutally sharp pinpoint critique, the legendary Guwanwan. During that specific era, my only internal metrics toward her were pure reverence and distant alienation. Yet right now, all I could process was how breathtakingly captivating she looked in this state. Your logic is entirely flawless, I agreed. So what's our exact deployment timeline for the supply run? She froze on the spot, completely caught off guard by how instantly and effortlessly I had greenlit and embraced her entire design blueprint. What about the budget limits? You dictate the parameters, I replied. You're the designated consultant here. She bit her lower lip gently, looking down to swipe through her tablet screen for a brief moment, before presenting a finalized grand total figure to my coordinates. That specific amount was a joke. It wasn't even enough to cover the retail cost of the high-end designer trench coat I was currently wearing. This is way too low, I noted. It's more than enough, she countered. We have absolutely zero need to source from overpriced mainstream luxury brands. True aesthetic perfection does not equal an astronomical price tag. I've mapped out a creative pop-up market that only goes live on weekends, where a ton of underground indie designers and vanguard artists showcase and liquidate their custom pieces. We can scout that location. I'm certain we can unearth some incredibly unique high-value assets there. Her eyes sparkled like diamonds, completely saturated with immense anticipation. That marked the absolute first time I had ever witnessed her radiating the pure, unadulterated hype of someone trying to budget and hunt for diamond-in-the-rough thrift deals. The stark contrast between this version of her and the elite heiress she used to be was monumental. Yet it fit her current profile with an oddly perfect harmony. When Saturday rolled around, I fired up the engine and drove her straight to that creative market, situated on the distant fringes of the city outskirts. The entire bazaar was hosted inside a vast decommissioned industrial factory warehouse, oozing a heavy raw industrial vibe blended with intense avant-garde artistic energy. The entire zone was absolutely packed with fresh, youthful faces, and all sorts of wildly eccentric, unique merchant stalls. Gu Wanwan looked exactly like a fish successfully returning to deep water. She secured my wrist, navigating us through the maze of endless pop-up booths. For every single raw aesthetic asset we passed, she instantly deployed her own brilliant, highly nuanced critique. Scan this candle holder layout. It's chiseled entirely from raw concrete, and the geometric phrasing is genius. And it's only $30. Check out this woven tapestry. It's 100% handcrafted, and the color palette coding is incredibly vanguard. Deploying this to our wall matrix will look stunning. And look at this canvas painting. This specific artist's color usage heavily mirrors Matisse's legendary style, but their brushwork is infinitely more liberated. Boss, what's the exact price log on this piece? The vendor was a young entry-level fine art student who quoted a highly reasonable baseline price metric. Gu Wanwan rotated her head to face my coordinates, her eyes broadcasting a silent query mixed with intense pure craving. I gave a simple nod of confirmation, and she immediately triggered the payment transaction, meticulously and gently rolling up the compact canvas asset. We spent the entire afternoon cycle scouting every single sector of the bazaar. She secured a massive haul of tactical aesthetic gear vases, candle holders, bizarre abstract sculptures, and that signature canvas painting. Not a single item was a high-budget flex. Yet the moment you combined the inventory, it completely broadcasted her elite, unmatched taste levels. I tracked closely behind her path, managing the physical inventory, carrying and running the payment macros, like a highly competent, dedicated assistant unit. Blinding sunbeams pierced through the old factory's massive window panes, showering her frame in a beautifully fractured pattern of light and shadow, cradling that canvas tight against her chest. She was actively locked in a negotiation with a merchant over a measly $10 variance, haggling with pure finesse, as her genuine smile completely lit up her eyes, staring at the side profile of her face. A sudden realization hit my system over these grueling 8 years. Every single ounce of my corporate grinding and hustle seemed to have been executed precisely to purchase this exact millisecond, to grant her the absolute security, after surviving the catastrophic storm of her destiny, to still retain the capacity to stand right here, and for the sake of pure unadulterated aesthetic joy, let out a completely unfiltered soul-deep laugh on the routing loop back to base. She reclined in the co-pilot seat, clutching her massive hoard of aesthetic loot, looking as intensely satisfied as a cat that had successfully raided the premium fish vault. Chenshi, thank you. What exactly are you logging gratitude for? Thank you, Itetya Data, for choosing to place absolute faith in my aesthetic taste. I let out a soft smirk, choosing to keep my thoughts locked off. The millisecond we cracked the entrance door, she immediately initialized her personal spatial overhaul protocol with zero latency, balancing carefully atop a footstool asset. She mounted that abstract canvas painting directly onto the study wall. Coordinate. The refreshing cool-toned color grading instantly neutralized the dense, suffocating vibe of the entire room. Next, she took that $30 raw concrete candle holder asset and stationed it precisely atop my bedside nightstand. She unrolled that custom handcrafted tapestry piece, layering it smoothly over the freezing hardwood floor. Every single coordinate within this apartment unit was rapidly being stamped and coded with her unique signature. When the night cycle triggered, I stepped into the study workspace, locking my gaze onto that canvas on the wall, for an immense duration without uttering a single voice line. This clinical desolate penthouse shell, where I had isolated solo for ages, had on this exact calendar day finally begun compiling the warm, authentic data points of a real home. Concurrently, the tracking metrics from our elite legal team were processing exponentially faster than our baseline estimations. After surviving multiple grueling high-stakes negotiation rounds, they successfully cracked the defenses of the Alpha Creditor, a massive Tier 1 state-owned banking institution, and finalized a preliminary debt settlement protocol framework. The institutional banking reps officially agreed that provided Gu Wanwan could inject a critical payment, liquidating exactly 20% of the total core principal within the designated deadline phase, their system would formally petition the judicial court to temporarily purge her profile from the restricted debtor blacklist, effectively restoring her baseline civil privilege metrics, such as authorization to open bank accounts and access high-speed public transit grids. This was without question a monumental bypass code discovery, yet that 20% metric remained an absolute soul-crushing sum that would easily vaporize any ordinary player's entire financial matrix and astronomical figure. The lead counsel stacked a massive mountain of legal documentation right onto the coffee table before our coordinates. His expression deadpan serious. Mr. Chent, Miss Gu. This is the absolute maximum tier of leniency our units can squeeze out of the system. The banking entity has granted us a hard 3-month countdown window to pool and execute this specific capital transaction. If our timer hits absolute zero and we default, every single progression point we've chiseled out becomes completely void. Gu Wanwan locked her eyes onto that formal settlement contract asset, her facial complexion instantly dropping back down to a deathly pale glaze. The fragile sparks of hope she had just begun compiling were once again destabilized, rocketing toward a system crash under this brutal reality. The moment we logged an exit protocol for the legal team, the penthouse unit instantly devolved back into a deathly paralyzing silence. Chenchi, I'll deploy immediately and liquidate all those custom art canvases and luxury collections. My father historically cached some high-value assets across overseas shell channels. If my system can trace and retrieve those logs. It's heavily insufficient, I interrupted flatly. Even if you fully execute a total asset liquidation on those items, the payout metrics will be a drop in the bucket compared to the total balance. Her physical posture completely collapsed at my words. The microscopic reserve of stamina she had just managed to generate instantly drained to absolute zero. Observing her spiral back down into utter hopelessness, I retreated into the study and retrieved my primary high-spec laptop terminal. Booting it up, I slid the hardware across the table directly before her coordinates. The monitor display was flashing a high-frequency stock trading interface, juxtaposed against a highly comprehensive personal asset audit portfolio. Blue-chip stocks, high-yield hedge funds, structured wealth products, and angel round equity stakes in several high-growth startups over these brutal years. Outside of maxing out my hours at my day job, I had hard-coded every single scrap of my spare personal time into dominating and manipulating the capital markets, mirroring the exact precision I used during my university days to lay out that original 90,000 fund. I had meticulously, and with absolute mathematical ruthlessness, optimized the performance of every single cent I acquired. I had long since evolved past the entry-level tier of a basic software engineer. The total wealth equity my system had generated over this timeline was vastly superior to anything her mind could compute. Gu Wanwan locked her eyes onto the monitor, scanning the massive strings of dazzling complex numbers and Tier 1 investment venture logs, utterly paralyzed by pure shock. All of this, how is this even? This is more than enough to fully clear the first baseline settlement payment, with an incredibly massive surplus left over in the reserve tanks. I slammed the laptop cover shut, locking my line of sight directly into her eyes. I explicitly stated the code before. The liability matrix assigned to your name, we are liquidating it as a squad. That was never an empty vocal line. But this is your hard-earned personal capital. Chenchi, I absolutely lack the right to hijack your life savings. I have already glitched and completely ruined my own destiny timeline. I refuse to drag your system down into the abyss with me. This isn't a systemic drag. Gu Wanwan, look at the framework. This is simply another business transaction. Have you forgotten I'm buying into your future company? I finance your legal operations, neutralize your debt metrics, and pilot you through this critical choke point. The exact second your corporate entity is fully restored to operational health and your revenue streams are back on an elite trajectory, I will officially demand a controlling 51% equity stake. That is a completely balanced venture protocol, is it not? She froze, entirely processing the terms of corporate equity as she locked her gaze onto me, staring intently at my hyper-serious deadpan expression that broadcasted absolutely zero trace of a joke. A sudden realization flashed through her system. She decoded that I was deploying this cold business persona yet again, solely to guard her fragile, fractured pride. This was my signature move, utilizing the most ruthless calculated market mechanics to insulate the deepest, most profound level of pure empathy. But I've lost everything. I have zero assets remaining. I don't own a corporate entity. I possess absolutely nothing. You will, I countered smoothly. You retain the absolute capacity to code a brand new enterprise registry. We can catalog it as Wanwan Design, or any custom designation that aligns with your vision. You will operate as the founder and the exclusive master artist. While my system functions as your alpha angel investor, her tears breach containment once more with zero warning streaming down her face. Yet this time she let out absolutely no vocal cries. She merely maintained a locked gaze on my coordinates for an immense duration. Then nodding with absolute force she uttered, "Deal." That single word carried the massive structural weight of a mountain. From that exact milestone calendar date, the core atmosphere inside the penthouse shifted down a highly nuanced vector. Our dynamic evolved far past a simple landlord and consultant framework. Our systems had synchronized into a high-tier co-founding squad. She completely terminated her loops of mourning past failures, shifting her processing power entirely to engineer the blueprint for our new enterprise, drafting a comprehensive business plan from scratch. She executed deep market analytics, scrutinized competitor specs, and even initialized preliminary outreach to re-establish contact with elite creative networks and old industry allies from her high society database. That decisive cutthroat executive aura, inherent to a high-tier commercial elite, was systematically reloading into her character model bit by bit. Concurrently, my sector remained locked on neutralizing the most complex and high-risk financial entanglements and legal choke points. I executed a massive sell-off across my prime stock portfolio, pooling the liquid capital assets into a singular node, fully prepared to pump the funds directly into our joint corporate venture. Our daily survival loops had unlocked a unique shared objective, a flawless synchronous rhythm. One particular night cycle, I logged back into base after an insanely late office grind. Pushing the entrance door open, I wasn't greeted by a cold, pitch-black void, but rather a deeply welcoming radiant amber glow, fused with a dense mouth-watering aroma of freshly cooked cuisine. My entire system suffered a complete brief freeze. Gu Wanwan was rocking a highly custom, somewhat ridiculous cartoon apron asset I had zero clue she had unboxed, smoothly porting a steaming hot dish straight out of the kitchen bay. It was classic stir-fried tomatoes and eggs, the absolute blueprint of a comfort home-cooked meal. She initiated, "I noticed your schedule was too chaotic to parse standard meal intervals, so I randomly threw this configuration together. I'm not entirely certain if it aligns with your taste preferences." Arranged neatly across the dining table were 2 side dishes and a primary soup asset. Aside from the signature tomato egg stir-fry, there was a plate of freshly sautéed broccoli alongside a bowl of rich pork rib broth. I locked my visual sensors onto those culinary assets, and then shifted my line of sight over to her profile. A hidden coordinate deep inside my chest instantly softened into complete and total mush. I pulled up a seat, clutched the chopsticks, and loaded a sample of the tomato egg stir-fry into my system. The flavor profile was unexpectedly elite. "This is phenomenal," I rated. She visibly downloaded a massive wave of relief, a soft, subtle smile chiseled across her lips. Back when my character model was studying abroad in an international zone, I had to self-train my system to code these recipes. During that specific phase, homesickness metrics were spiking hard. This marked the absolute first time she had autonomously accessed the logs. Regarding her historical life cycle overseas, I maintained my meal intake while keeping my audio channels wide open to listen. She unboxed random fragmented memories in a massive data stream, detailing how she navigated an entirely foreign country. Her absolute first time crossing the threshold of an international supermarket, the first time she manually processed raw ingredients, and her secret crying cycles triggered by sheer isolation and home nostalgia. Her narrative delivery was incredibly serene, as if she were merely reading the lore of an entirely different player model. Yet my mind could vividly simulate the exact rendering, an elite-tier princess who had never once touched a household chore in her life, forced solo to confront the brutal glitches of basic survival and crushing loneliness. That specific dining phase was executed in profound quiet serenity, yet radiated a deep, unyielding warmth. The microsecond the food was cleared, she aggressively claimed the dishwashing protocol, and I chose not to trigger a competitive interaction over it, merely leaning against the kitchen doorframe to observe. I locked my gaze onto her rolled-up sleeves and her hyper-focused silhouette handling the cleaning macro at the sink station. Under the amber ambient lighting, her side profile chiseled pure softness and absolute perfection. A sudden wave of realization flooded my logic core, clearing the debt balance, launching a high-stakes startup venture. None of those grand objectives truly held any real weight anymore. My system simply wanted to extend this exact loop configuration for as long as possible. All I truly desire is for these peaceful, precious days to endure just a little bit longer. Just a little while longer. Life soon evolved into a flawless, high-precision machine. And through our perfectly synchronized joint grinding, every single operational gear began to spin with absolute stability. By day, I crushed major corporate tech projects, while simultaneously engineering a bypass for our massive debt crisis. And the exact second I cracked the door back base at night, there was always a warm glow and a steaming feast locked and loaded for my system. Gu Wanwan, meanwhile, dumped 100% of her processing power into booting up her creative empire. She successfully registered the enterprise, launched a custom high-end portfolio site, and even initiated a heavy content push across several elite art platforms, publishing her avant-garde manifestos on interior aesthetics, alongside her raw blueprint concept designs. Her elite tier talent metric was completely undeniable, instantly farming a dedicated cult following of core digital fans. Though her system hadn't locked down an official commercial contract yet, her daily schedule was packed to the brim, radiating pure purpose. The intricate dynamic tethering us together had seamlessly upgraded into a profoundly comfortable status code. We were co-living flatmates. We were ride-or-die startup co-founders dominating the battlefield, and occasionally my consciousness would experience a strange glitch, making me feel like we were a powerhouse couple locked in a decade-long marriage. When the weekend rolled around, the kitchen supply vault hit absolute zero. Our inventory is completely depleted. Let's execute a supermarket run, she announced, waving a precisely chiseled restock manifest in my direction. I gave a simple nod of confirmation and secured the vehicle keys. This marked our absolute first time scouting a massive grocery grid together like a standard mainstream couple. The superstore was packed to the ceiling, buzzing with raw, chaotic human energy. Gu Wanwan steered the shopping cart through the aisles, running deep analytics on every single asset stacked on the shelves. She would ruthlessly calculate a difference of mere pennies to select a more cost-effective brand of Greek yogurt, yet simultaneously allow her aesthetic bugs to trigger buying an entirely impractical bag of premium imported pasta solely because the packaging design was top tier. I maintained a close trail behind her coordinates, observing her oscillate between a hyper-calculated finance optimizer and a wild inner child-driven free spirit. It was breathtakingly alive. But right as our units queued up at the checkout terminal, a highly hesitant voice transmitted from the adjacent sector. Wait. Is that actually Chenchi? I rotated my head back to trace the audio source, capturing a heavily styled high-fashion female player model, staring directly at my coordinates with a face saturated in utter shock. My memory database buffer loaded for an immense duration before I finally excavated her user profile name from the dusty low-tier sector. She was an old classmate from our exact university cohort. Her name was logged as Lin Fei Fei, and she was historically a core roomie in Gu Wanwan's exact university dorm unit. Hello there, I muttered, giving a stiff professional nod of acknowledgement. Lin Fei Fei's line of sight instantly bypassed my coordinates, locking dead onto Gu Wanwan standing right in front of me. The exact millisecond her system processed Gu Wanwan's face, that basic curiosity instantly upgraded into absolute mind-blowing shock, heavily laced with a completely unfiltered toxic wave of schadenfreude, absolutely dying to watch a high-profile train wreck. Go, Gu Wanwan. Oh my god, it actually is you. I literally thought my tracking system glitched. How on earth did you... She cut her own vocal line short, but her eyes were already executing a ruthless up-and-down body scan, radiating pure high-tier condescension that spoke absolute volumes. Gu Wanwan was rocking a completely standard blank white tee combined with basic denim jeans, her skin completely bare of any cosmetic enhancements. Though her vitality metrics were light years ahead of the broken state I found her in, when juxtaposed against this immaculately contoured luxury brand flexing entity named Lin Fei Fei, she still appeared completely stripped of her former high society armor. Gu Wanwan's physical frame locked up instantly, every drop of blood draining from her face. Her internal system's immediate threat response was to flee, desperately wanting to cloak herself from reality, but I stepped up a unit, smoothly tanking the aggro by positioning my body directly between them, severing the visual link from Lin Fei Fei's highly toxic suffocating gaze. It's been a minute. Our units are operating on a tight schedule, so we'll be logging out first. With that stated, I overrode control of the shopping cart from Gu Wanwan's grip, steering the unit to initiate an immediate exit. Whoa! Don't log out so fast. It's a reunion of legacy classmates. Can't we download a quick update? Wanwan, I heard rumors from Lija regarding your household collapse. So you've officially paired up with Chenchi now. Her vocal tone was deeply laced with double meanings and malicious intent, covertly broadcasting, look at the legendary, untouchable, highborn princess, now reduced to leeching off a low-tier peasant boy she historically viewed as complete trash. I terminated my forward movement vector, rotating my frame to lock a freezing deadpan gaze onto her coordinates. Lin Fei Fei, I highly suggest you recalibrate your vocabulary parameters. Wanwan is currently my primary corporate partner, and she is an absolute core member of my family. I hammered down that word family with absolute shatterproof authority. Lin Fei Fei was instantly paralyzed by my freezing apex tier gaze, and the sheer suffocating pressure of my dominant aura. Her jaw twitched open, completely losing the nerve to output another toxic line. I completely cut off all interaction with her entity, interlocking my fingers firmly around Gu Wanwan's, and pioneered an exit path out of the hypermarket through a crossfire of judgmental stares. Gu Wanwan's palm was absolute sub-zero ice, and her entire physical structure was violently glitching with tremors. The moment our units booted back into the vehicle cabin, she dropped her vocal processing to absolute zero, merely pivoting her head to track the scenery outside the window glass. As her shoulders subtly twitched and convulsed, I refrained from firing up the vehicle engine and opted out of deploying any spoken lines. I knew with absolute certainty that this agonizing, cringe-inducing encounter had ruthlessly shattered the psychological firewall she had spent blood and tears compiling, tearing wide open a catastrophic security breach. It served as a brutal, unforgiving system notification that within the core database of society, she was still classified as that fallen idol hurled down from the highest heavens, a complete and utter laughingstock of a failure. After an immense duration of processing time, she finally rotated her head back, her red-rimmed eyes locking onto mine. Chen-Chi, I already stated the absolute code just now, I countered. You are my family, and I will never authorize any low-tier player to grief you. My vocal delivery was deadpan serene, yet it carried a monumental, unshakable kinetic force. She locked her gaze onto my coordinates, her tears breaching containment like a completely severed string of pearls. Why do you continue to pump maximum resources into saving my system? She choked out through heavy sobs, rebooting that exact same repetitive loop query that our units had already cross-examined countless times before, staring directly into her tear-soaked, devastatingly beautiful face. A hidden coordinate deep within my central core felt as if it had been struck by a high-velocity kinetic impactor. 8 brutal years ever since that fateful toxic game of truth or dare initiated it all. Our entire relational dynamic had been gated behind a fragile artificial barrier of calculated business deals and crippling psychological debts. I had spent every waking moment treading with absolute precision to carefully maintain that boundary, because I decoded that it was the ultimate shield to protect her vulnerabilities, as well as a defensive firewall for my own sanity. But during that exact microsecond inside the supermarket grid, the moment my system auto-fired that word family with zero latency, I knew that artificial barrier had been thoroughly vaporized by my own hands. I refused to utilize cold commercial logic as a masking algorithm any longer. Extending my arm across the console, I used the pad of my thumb to gently wipe away the tear trails on her cheek. And then leaning forward, I systematically closed the distance between our coordinates, within the ultra-confined, intimate perimeter of the car cabin. Within that micro-perimeter reserved exclusively for the 2 of our units, I captured her trembling lips with an intense, definitive kiss. Her physical form instantly sustained a severe shock freeze, her pupils dilating to maximum capacity from sheer astonishment. Her lips tasted sub-zero cold, heavily saturated with the briny trace of her active teardrops, yet incredibly soft. This contact was remarkably feather-light and tender, stripped of any base carnality, functioning purely as an absolute 8-year delayed, hyper-solemn declaration of loyalty. I elevated my head, resting my forehead against hers, staring directly into her bewildered, heavily short-circuiting eyes. Because from the exact millisecond I processed those $90,000 8 years ago, you ceased to be just a basic creditor on my registry. You were the blinding beacon I looked up to for 4 solid years, and the absolute singular endgame objective I spent another 4 years grind-locking my system to successfully achieve. That specific kiss manifested like a high-velocity kinetic stone hurled into a dead calm lake within the chaotic matrix of my consciousness, triggering Tier 1 ripple effects that refused to stabilize or settle down. I could clearly parse the rising temperature data of his lips, alongside that profoundly grounding, highly comforting, clean cedarwood scent radiating from his character model. The exact second his unit backed away, I remained totally locked in that hyper-rigid, paralyzed posture, my cognitive core experiencing an absolute blackout loop. What data did his system just output? He verified that I was the celestial light he spent 4 years tracking. He decoded that I was the absolute singular endgame objective driving his entire 4-year grind code. Those statements operated like a cluster of synchronized tender flashbangs, detonating with absolute acoustic violence directly against my audio receptors, obliterating the remnants of my current psychological firewall, which had just been breached, by reality smashing my carefully salvaged defenses into pure atomic dust. Are you just running a pity protocol on me right now? Is that it, pitying you? Guwanwan. Did your memory logs completely delete the data of who exactly was the truly pathetic low-tier tragedy 8 years ago? I froze instantly. I marched in wearing a heavily washed-out threadbare budget jacket, stepping straight into that elite KTV lounge where the very oxygen smelled like liquid capital. I lacked the basic funds to even process a split bill for a single meal interval within the collective scanning matrix of your social circle. I likely didn't even register as a valid clown asset back during that timeline phase. Did your system ever deploy a pity protocol for my existence? Have you ever felt even a single shred of pity for me? I instinctively shook my head in denial, screaming no inside my mind. I admit it. The version of me back then was completely intoxicated by her own high status. Utterly blind to the harsh raw friction of real-life survival, I perceived Chen-Chi as if he were some foreign entity dwelling within an entirely separate dimension. My systems registered curiosity along with absolute bewilderment. But there was completely zero pity and zero genuine sympathy. Those emotions simply didn't exist on our overlapping frequencies. You didn't look down on me, instead using a deeply flawed, clumsy methodology that even your own consciousness wasn't fully aware of. You handed my system a golden ticket. With those $90,000, you constructed a grand structural bridge for me, granting me the ultimate escape route to crawl out of my suffocating, pitch-black abyss. And finally cross over to witness what lay on the other side. From that precise milestone date, your unit was stationed at the absolute far end of that bridge. Every waking day, I sprinted across that span with absolute desperate force, never daring to halt. The moment I looked up, your silhouette was locked in my sights. You were my ultimate North Star. It never crossed my processing core that a day would arrive, where I could actually walk side by side with your entity. My primitive logic loop simply assumed that, once I crossed the ultimate finish line, I would at least possess the baseline stats to stand directly before your coordinates, lock eyes with you as a true equal, and then, with absolute honor and dignity, repay every single microdebt I owed your name. It took me 8 brutal years. But my system finally crossed that finish line. Yet the moment I arrived, I realized you were no longer stationed at that high-tier terminal. Your character model had plummeted, sinking into an abyss far more unforgiving than the mire I once crawled through. So during this current server cycle, it's my turn to engineer a bridge back to you. My tears instantly breached all defensive firewalls, erupting like a catastrophic dam break. So that was the hidden truth all along. The absolute reality was that a trivial game I had completely purged from my active memory. A casual sum of cash I had never once logged as significant had actually chiseled itself deep into his soul, leaving a monumental eternal brand. An accidental pebble I had tossed into the world without a single thought had somehow possesses the raw reality warping power to entirely redirect the raging river of a human being's destiny. And now that massive torrent was surging backward in a reverse tide, desperately fighting to resuscitate my completely dried up, withered core. My memory logs are completely blurred regarding how our units navigated back home. The singular data packet locked in my mind is the moment he fired up the engine. With total unforced natural smoothness, he intertwined his fingers with my ice-cold palm resting helplessly on my knee. His hand felt incredibly vast, rugged, and powerful, radiating a profound warmth packed with absolute kinetic strength. He dropped his vocal tracks to absolute zero for the entire drive, merely maintaining a dominant, non-negotiable grip to anchor my system firmly to his side. The moment we breached the perimeter of the apartment, he sorted the grocery inventory straight into the refrigerator unit, then naturally pivoted straight into the kitchen workspace to initiate the standard dinner preparation macro. I remained stationed in the living area, tracking his highly focused silhouette grinding away in the kitchen zones, towering completely unshakable, and deploying a passive aura of absolute security. This exact man whom my younger self had once left stranded light years behind. The quiet yet low-tier scholarship student who barely registered on anyone's radar had covertly and entirely outside my awareness evolved into an apex monumental fortress, a towering canopy fully capable of shielding my broken reality from the raging storm. "Dinner served," he noted. I pulled up a seat and clutched the chopsticks, yet my motor functions completely stalled. "Chen-Chi, given what just went down our units right now, what exactly is our current relationship status code?" He broke his gaze away from the dishes, staring directly into my face, which was heavily flashing alerts of pure anxiety and panic, and abruptly let out a soft, genuine smile. That specific expression cut through reality like winter sunlight, instantly vaporizing the absolute last sector of frost sealing my emotional core. He opted out of deploying a verbal response, choosing instead to extend his arm across the boundary, utilizing the feather-light brush of his fingertips to gather a rogue stray strand of hair cascading down my cheek, smoothly tucking it behind my ear. The micro-interaction was devastatingly tender, packed with an undeniable, unwritten intimacy. At that exact coordinate in time, my system completely decoded everything. The following day marked the high-stakes Monday server cycle. Chen-Chi executed his standard routine, logging out early to secure the corporate base. Yet, my internal analytics flagged that a fundamental structural shift had occurred. For the absolute first time following his physical exit from the home base, my core processing unit suffered a heavy aching void labeled as pure loneliness. I migrated over to the threshold of his private quarters. The doorway was completely unlatched, revealing an environment that perfectly mirrored his structural code, ultra-minimalist, sterile, and cold, with every single asset organized in perfect, flawless geometric alignment, echoing a psychological profile that was intensely precise and fiercely self-disciplined. Resting upon the mattress layout were the exact pajamas he had just unequipped, still preserving traces of his thermal energy signatures and distinct scent profile. Driven by a sudden irrational system glitch, I stepped inside, gathering those fabric assets tightly against my chest, burying my face deep into the material, and inhaled a massive, desperate lungful of his essence. It was entirely saturated with his distinct scent profile. This raw realization triggered an instant thermal spike, setting my entire face ablaze. feeling exactly like a criminal caught red-handed in a stealth heist. I rapidly returned the garment assets to their original coordinates, executing an immediate tactical retreat from his private quarters. Yet my heart rate was violently spiking inside my chest, crashing against my ribs like a wild beast frantically trying to break containment. So this was the ultimate reality of harboring intense feelings for someone. A dizzying cocktail of pure euphoria, absolute panic, and overwhelming vulnerability. My system remained completely locked in this chaotic, short-circuiting emotional loop, rendering me completely incapable of executing any productive tasks, until an incoming voice transmission from my legal counsel ruthlessly dragged my consciousness back down to reality. Miss Gu, the banking conglomerate has officially verified the terms of the settlement matrix. However, our team requires you to supply additional verification data regarding your late father's legacy corporate assets from the early operational phases, specifically the offshore accounts and international holdings. This dataset is absolutely critical to optimize our leverage in the upcoming negotiation phase. Does your memory log contain the coordinates where these high-priority archives were typically stored? My father, he operated a highly classified deep vault security safe. It wasn't stationed at the corporate headquarters, nor was it concealed within our primary residence. It's hidden inside our legacy family manor out in the suburban sectors. Understood. I will immediately lodge an emergency motion with the judicial court, utilizing the recovery of critical legal evidence as our primary leverage, to grant our units a one-time provisional entry clearance. You need to brace your system, as your physical presence will be mandatory at the grid location to pinpoint the vault. The exact second the audio link severed, my psychological state plummeted down into a dark void. Returning to that sector meant I had to re-enter a zone that once anchored every single one of my beautiful, elite childhood memories, but had now been thoroughly reduced to a cursed, desolate ruin. A cold wave of dread paralyzed my system. I pinged Chen Qi, laying out the entire situation to his coordinates. He maintained absolute silence on the line for a brief processing interval before replying. I'm overriding my schedule and taking leave to escort you. There's no need, your corporate grind is far too intense right now, I countered. I'm escorting you. Exactly 48 hours later, our units, accompanied by the legal counsel, stood directly in front of those painfully familiar massive iron gates. The official government asset seizure seals had already been sliced open, and two stone-faced judicial enforcement officers stood watch nearby, maintaining a completely cold deadpan monitoring stance. I locked my gaze onto that hauntingly familiar, intricately carved iron gateway, staring at the courtyard overgrown with high, chaotic weeds that had completely run wild from total lack of maintenance. My vision instantly blurred with a sudden burning rush of tears. I vividly remembered that backyard swing set built entirely by my father's own hands, as the ultimate surprise milestone for my 5th birthday, and that expansive grand lawn was the exact coordinates where my elite high society 18th birthday bash went down. Every single blade of grass and decaying branch here was heavily watermarked with my childhood memories, serving as a living monument to the absolute golden era of my family's legacy. Now the architecture remains intact, but the entire human matrix has been wiped out. I felt a crushing weight paralyze my lower extremities as if heavy liquid lead had been pumped straight into my veins, rendering me completely incapable of executing a single step forward. Suddenly, a surge of profound warmth enveloped my hand. It was Chen Qi. He opted out of deploying any superficial vocal lines, choosing instead to exert a powerful anchoring squeeze against my palm, and quietly initiated a forward movement vector guiding my frame, one grueling step at a time, straight into the heart of this deeply familiar, yet ghost town-like estate. The interior of the manor was blanketed under a dense, suffocating layer of gray dust, with every piece of luxury furniture draped in eerie white dust covers, looming in the shadows like rows of silent forgotten phantoms. The very oxygen inside the perimeter was heavily saturated with the stagnant stench of decay. Relying strictly on my hard-coded memory logs, I marshaled the squad up to the 2nd floor, breaching the absolute deepest chamber located within my father's grand executive study. It was a highly restricted private museum vault. The grand walls that historically exhibited priceless masterpieces of high art were now reduced to a tragic gallery of completely hollow, vacant frames, leaving nothing but faded rectangular imprints. I migrated directly toward a specific partition wall, and following the precise numerical sequence mapped out in my mind, I engaged a hidden control console camouflaged as a row of vintage leather books, punching in the security override code. The heavy wall paneling slowly slid out of alignment with a low mechanical rumble, unveiling a massive heavy-duty built-in security vault. The legal counsel and the judicial task force variants instantly dropped their professional poker faces, exposing sheer disbelief on their features. I manually rotated the mechanical dial, disengaging the massive armor-plated vault door. The interior was entirely devoid of the massive hordes of gold bars and glittering diamonds I had anticipated. Instead, there were only rows of perfectly organized, high-density legal documents, and a few dust-covered velvet display boxes. I cracked open the latch of the primary container, revealing a flawless sapphire pendant resting silently upon the fabric, the absolute crown jewel of my late mother's personal collection. The adjacent container preserved a high-end luxury men's chronograph, the absolute first asset I had ever purchased using my own allowance to gift my father. So that was the ultimate truth to his processing core. The highest value data packets were never the legendary multi-million-dollar collectibles that auction houses fought over, but these simple, irreplaceable vessels holding the pure emotional code of his family. My internal emotional containment completely failed, and my tears breached the final line of defense. Heavy, sorrowful droplets splattering continuously against the weathered velvet casing. Chen-Chi migrated to my coordinates, gently locking me in a protective embrace from behind. He completely refrained from deploying any vocal input, merely resting his chin softly against the crown of my head, broadcasting his own thermal energy to silently patch my broken system. At that exact microsecond inside this sterile sub-zero chamber, heavily glitched with devastating traumatic data packets from my past, I experienced an unprecedented monumental wave of absolute peace. Miss Gu, this is an absolute Tier 1 breakthrough discovery. With this critical intel unlocked, our team's leverage against the banking conglomerate has massively upscaled. This verifies that your late father didn't maliciously siphon corporate assets. Instead, way before the company's core framework collapsed, he had already engineered a flawless legal asset protection firewall, specifically to shield his family, within the legal domain. This grants our faction absolute tactical initiative in the next phase. This was without a doubt the initial beacon of light piercing through a pitch-black tunnel. Granted, the coordinates to resolving every single systemic issue were still light years away, but at least our team had successfully re-established a viable hope metric. As our units evacuated the ancestral perimeter, I cast one final glance back at that massive estate, which loomed incredibly desolate under the crimson hues of the setting sun. The crushing weight of grief in my core seemed to have undergone a minor dilution process. Perhaps the ultimate methodology to sever ties with the past isn't to purge the database via amnesia, but to courageously salvage the high-value emotional core from the ruins, and continue pushing forward on the main quest line, and standing directly at my coordinates. I now possessed a max-tier companion fully locked in to run this lifelong gauntlet with me. Throughout the entire return transit, I remained completely anchored against Chen-Chi's shoulder, keeping my vocal channels offline. He similarly opted out of deploying any spoken dialogue, choosing instead to calibrate the vehicle's audio system, to play my absolute favorite track, Castle in the Sky. The sweeping nostalgic melody operated like a tender macro, smoothing out the jagged, chaotic static within my mind. From that exact baseline date onward, the timeline of my existence felt as though it had entered a high-velocity fast-forward state. Weaponizing the newly unlocked archives, the Legal Squad initiated a devastating counter-offensive negotiation cycle against the banking faction. Concurrently, my own questline finally unlocked the absolute first major progression milestone for my new professional career path. Exactly one server week later, an unlisted, unrecognized contact number pinged my comms network. The caller verified his identity as the general manager of an elite boutique hotel, stating that while scouring the web matrix, he had intercepted several data logs I had uploaded regarding spatial aesthetics, architectural frameworks, and blueprints. He expressed immense respect for my creative design philosophy and wanted to formally recruit my services to masterfully spearhead the aesthetic blueprint for their brand new, ultra-exclusive VIP lounge interior styling packet. The millisecond the transmission cut off, I completely lost my composure and began jumping on the spot from pure ecstasy. This marked my absolute undisputed first official paying client. I aggressively breached the threshold of the study and launched myself into a crushing hug around Chen-Chi, who was scanning work documents. I successfully secured the contract. Chen-Chi, my system, officially locked in the deal. The sheer kinetic force of my impact caused his frame to stumble backward, but his cognitive faculties instantly registered the massive news, and a look of profound heartfelt pride erupted across his features, steadying my stance by firmly gripping my shoulders. He analyzed my face, which was heavily flushed from absolute adrenaline, his gaze completely saturated with pure admiration and reverence. I always knew. You were hardwired for absolute greatness. I channeled every single ounce of my remaining creative passion, and fully invested it straight into this high-stakes assignment. I survived multiple brutal back-to-back all-nighters, scouring through a monumental ocean of historical design data archives, and conceptualized dozens of intricate, hand-drawn layout blueprints. Chen-Chi completely refrained from micromanaging any of my executive creative choices. Yet, during those grueling midnight grind sessions, he would silently manifest at my desk to supply a warm mug of milk. Whenever my cognitive processing hit a brick wall and left me drowning in sheer frustration, he would drag me outdoors for a therapeutic walk, recounting hilarious high-value corporate anecdotes from his own office grind, just to successfully recalibrate my stressed-out mindset. Exactly half a month down the line, armed with a massive hyper-detailed and borderline flawless pitch deck, I rendezvoused with the hotel manager. The executive was completely blown away by my avant-garde design language executing the official contract signing right there on the spot. The initial design retainer payout was rapidly wired straight into the newly registered corporate account of Wanwan. Design Studio. The exact moment the banking SMS notification flashed on my screen, displaying the confirmation data for that first real chunk of revenue. Emotional tears violently surged to the brink of escaping my eyes. This asset log was the ultimate validation for me. It proved that Gu Wanwan was absolutely not a low-tier parasite destined to be a burden on someone else's life. I possessed the capability to weaponize my own two hands and deploy my own raw genius to completely reclaim my apex status. Clutching my mobile device, I sprinted out of the apartment perimeter, racing at maximum velocity until I hit the ground floor of Chen Chi's corporate headquarters. I dialed his link, get down to the lobby coordinates immediately. Right now, this exact second, merely a few minutes later, he emerged from the high-rise glass doors, rushing with immense urgency. What's wrong? Did a system crisis occur? I maintained absolute vocal silence, instantly pivoting onto the tips of my toes, and dead center under the intense heavy gaze of the bustling civilian crowd. I planted an explosive, undeniable kiss directly upon his lips. Then I thrust my mobile display screen right into his line of sight, acting exactly like a top-tier student flexing a flawless straight-A report card. Chen Chi, look at this. I officially generated my own massive revenue stream. He analyzed the multi-digit balance update flashing on the monitor, then locked eyes with my radiant, hyper-vibrant expression. His brain froze for a brief processing microsecond, before he burst into a booming, uninhibited laugh. His vocal tracts were completely saturated with intense joy and absolute adoration. Magnificent, my absolute queen Gu Wanwan. What type of high-tier cuisine is your system craving tonight? My treat. Negative on that, you are not swiping your card tonight. Because this entire banquet is on me, we are returning to the home base. And I am personally cooking you. The legendary ultra-premium $25 shrimp rice bowl masterclass understood. He smiled. Let's head home. Beneath the bleeding crimson rays of the setting sun, our silhouettes stretched out across the pavement. I knew with absolute mathematical certainty that our brand new, hyper-prosperous future timeline had finally loaded in. A bright future brimming with limitless hope has finally arrived.